We are Pro Cannabis Media.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the first edition of Cannabis Chat. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and we are live in the studio here just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Now, for those of you who have no idea who I am, first of all, I'm sure on Twitch, I am definitely one of the oldest chatters on the twitch.tv software. I guarantee it. I just turned 63 years old. I'm not afraid to admit that. Okay, and I understand that gaming is how Twitch evolved. Now, what you don't know, unless you really know your Twitch TV trivia, it originally was Justin.tv. That's right, Twitch TV was Justin.tv, and that was a live streaming service that an old company of mine called Young Broadcasters of America used back in 2011. Think about that. You didn't even know what streaming was in 2011, and I was working with young people. They're the ones who taught me about streaming back then for Young Broadcasters of America when I trained young people to be on-camera talent. So when I finally figured out that maybe I should become a talent again, well, here I am talking about cannabis on Twitch TV. I am amazed at this whole technology thing because I'm pretty sure we're live streaming on a few other entities out. You've probably heard of YouTube and Facebook and all that neat stuff. I can tell you that there's a gentleman behind the scenes here named Dan French, our studio director, who is busy making sure everything works properly. And since this is our first live stream on Twitch.tv, something is going to go wrong. It always does happen in live broadcasting. And live broadcasting is what I've been doing since I was, yikes, 20 years old, which is 43 years ago. I'm not going to bore you with my entire life story, although people who do know me know I do like to talk about myself. I want to talk more about how Pro Cannabis Media came in being and how I ended up hosting a show in my own studio again. Because back in the day when I was a full-time sportscaster, I had shows called Sports Call, Sports Forum, Sports Talk. I filled in for Ted Sarandis in Boston on his show at WEI in the 1990s when I worked at NECN, New England Cable News. I had my own show, Sports World with Jimmy Young, and I had Kid Company Sports World. That was a sports talk show for kids. That was the first one in the nation to have a live sports talk show for kids, and that is the one that I won the Emmy for a talk show host. So that's kind of my career. Now let's talk about cannabis. I'm in Massachusetts. This is a legal substance. I am a medicinal card holder of cannabis here in the Bay State, and I've been using it medicinally since 2013. Okay, that's when I got my card, and that's when this program, the medical marijuana program, began. But today, what we're going to do on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 4 o'clock to 6 p.m. Eastern Time is chat with you, the viewer, about cannabis. Hopefully, we will be able to answer some of the questions you might have about this substance. Okay? Now, you could call me Uncle Jimmy since I'm old and I'm kind of comfortable with this OG thing, or you could just call me Jimmy, or you could call me Professor Weed, because on Wednesdays, we are going to focus on education. That's right, and a little bit later on this show, we're going to attempt a phone call. Everything's going to be an attempt here, because it's the first time we've done this, with a professor of cannabis out at Colorado College. His name is Santiago Guerra, and he'll be joining us a little bit later on this live stream. We also are anticipating a live in-studio guest, I guess I could call Hilary an old friend because I think I've known her now for at least 2 years. She will be coming in. Hilary King will be coming in studio and joining me to talk about her new gig at Northeast Alternatives. Now, if you happen to be watching the lead up to this show, you saw images of a grow coming from a dispensary called Alternative Compassion Services. And that is out of Bridgewater, Massachusetts, and that is their grow room. We are looking for more people out there who want to share their grow cameras with us. We will live stream the grow cam footage and give you credit for that, and perhaps even tell me what kind of strain you might be growing, because if there's one thing I have learned is there's a lot of different strains and a lot of different funny names out there when it comes to the flower of the cannabis plant. So, right off the bat though, we are going to give you a few news items. I grew up in newsrooms all over the country. No, I didn't. In New England. I've been fortunate enough to have my entire career in commercial broadcasting in either Portland, Maine, or in Boston, Massachusetts, my hometown. My career goal was to become a sportscaster into my hometown of Boston, and I accomplished that back in 1992 when I did the first ever sportscast at NECN, New England Cable News. And I have old friends still to this day from NECN. I think there's 2 or 3 originals still working now for NBC 10 Universal, because that NECN it's been absorbed by the NBC Universal ownership group, and they are now the NBC affiliate in town, and you can still watch NECN. So here's some news headlines. First of all, you may have already seen this. Cheech and Chong. Okay, now, my age group knows who Cheech and Chong is, but I'm not so sure younger people know who Cheech and Chong were. But they were the first ones who created a film about smoking weed. It was called Up in Smoke. And Cheech and Chong went on to becoming characters and personalities unto themselves. Tommy Chong has been in the cannabis business for many years. We got to interview him on one of our shows with Kurt Dalton from Cannabis.net, and we'll talk more about Kurt in just a moment. But Tommy Chong's a great guy, entrepreneur, and you know what? He waves the flag for the pro-cannabis movement out in California. I'm pretty sure he has Chong's choice, and now he and his buddy Cheech Marin are getting together, and they're actually going to have a string of dispensaries in the western part of the United States. That'd be your Colorados, your Californias, I'm pretty sure Nevada is in there, Oregon, and Washington State as well. So another thing that happened today, the banks in the United States, they did a little study. I believe this came from MJ Biz Daily. And sure enough, fewer and fewer banks are doing business with cannabis companies because, after all, it's still a federally illegal substance. I believe 7 states are going to be voting for legalization in November. And I just can't believe I've lived to see the day that cannabis has become a political issue for the presidency of the United States. This is an incredible time. We are all in a historic time right now. So that is one other thing. Now here's perhaps the biggest story that has happened in the last week. And speaking of weekly news, that's when I get to talk about Kurt Dalton from Cannabis.net. They are our flagship partner. They basically share and distribute all the original content that Pro Cannabis Media produces and has produced over the last year or so. And Kurt usually joins me every Thursday evening. We put together a little news and commentary video show, and we get contributions from Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report and Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily International in Canada. And we also get Phil Adams from the Vote Pro podcast out of Washington, D.C. with our D.C. report. We put it all together and we release it on Fridays. And sure enough, on Friday's show of Cannabis Chat, we will have that Weed Talk news available for you in its entirety. And that could be a lot of fun, and it certainly will be informative. And I know one thing about Kurt, he has comments about just about everything having to do with the cannabis space. But this is one item that will definitely be in there, and it is tied, and I don't want to make this about me, but this is a total coincidence. On September 3rd, when I was born, back in 1957, do the math, I already told you I was 67 years old, okay? Some entrepreneurs in Tel Aviv, Israel, put a drone in the sky with little packets of cannabis leaf and cannabis flower. And they dropped it from the sky, and it was raining cannabis leaves. And I think we have some footage actually that we might be running right now, courtesy of our friends. We don't have friends in Turkey, but that's where we got this video from, and from Reuters. And you may have seen it all over the news in the United States, because let's face it, it truly was an amazing thing to see these packets coming from the sky and people walking over to the street, picking it up, looking at it and going, hey, check this out. This looks like it's good bud, right? Give it a little whiff there and have yourself a little party. Responsibly, please, okay? That is one of our little news items that I'm sure we will be talking about, and we want to give credit. Oh, here's the drone. Is that what I'm looking at now? This is great. So there's your drone up in the air, and I slowed it down because we didn't have a lot of footage of the little thing. But look, there are the little packets falling on the ground. People are walking over to them, and actually, you can actually hear them talking in the background, not in English, I might add. And they'll pick up these packets and look at it. I think they hold it up for their little smartphone. And then they go and have themselves a little party or a little medicine or however else they want to enjoy it responsibly. But that is a news item that we will definitely be following and having as part of our Weed Talk News broadcast, video, show. I don't even know what to call these things. These are digital recorded files and live streams. But to an old guy like me, an old school guy, they're all just programs and shows and content, and we're distributing it in whichever way we possibly can. All right? So let's see what else we got going here in the news section. I believe, I know what else I've got to talk about. I did mention, indeed, that this is Wednesday, and I don't know if any of you have caught this show or not, but Jim Belushi, who is the younger brother of the late, great John Belushi, a member of the original cast of Saturday Night Live a long time ago, like when I was in college, it was coming out, it was fresh, it was a new show, it was a long time ago. This is what happens when you get old. You have a lot of perspective and experiences. Anyway, Jim Belushi has a show called Growing Belushi, and it airs on the Discovery Channel. And it airs at 10 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday night. And I'm pretty sure, since it's live now, we're live now, I get to say it's going to be airing tonight on Discovery. It's also available on demand on whatever demand service you use. I happen to check it out. It's on YouTube. All 3 episodes are on YouTube. It's a riot. The characters that are in this are fascinating. They're members of Jim's family. They're friends. There's Captain Jack. Captain Jack was the guy who supplied the weed illegally on the original cast at Saturday Night Live. Now, I'm sure you are shocked to hear that people like Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi and Jane Curtin partook or whatever they did. They used it. They used weed. And you can imagine now where some of those stories and characters evolved. I'm sure that's where they came up with a lot of their creative ideas. A reminder that we have this chat function on twitch.tv, and I see that we've got somebody in there that knows us, which is always good. And if you do put a chat in there, we'll get to it. We'll mention you on the air or on this stream, and perhaps even if you ask a question, we might be able to answer it, give you credit. And this is how we're going to interact with our live streaming audience. So as I was talking about Wednesday being Education Day here on Cannabis Chat, one of the bits that Jim Belushi did, all right, and I'm giving full courtesy and thank yous to the producers of this show, to Jim Belushi, to the Belushi family, to the foundations, to everything. He did this bit called Cannabis 101, where he played the role of Professor Weed. Let's check it out, shall we?
So you say you don't like to smoke?
Got so high in high school in 1975. With edibles, you can control your experience.
I want a controlled experience. He wants a controlled experience.
When you, edibles are gummies, chocolate, cookies, brownies. But don't ever take a cookie and a brownie from a friend because the dosage is not controlled. Go to a legal, registered recreational dispensary.
Dosage.
You get a 100 milligram candy bar. This is my favorite chocolate. Bang chocolate. Childproof.
Unless your kid can wield a hammer, don't worry about it.
Here is 100 milligrams. Way too much. You break it down, it's scored. Most people like a 5 milligram dosage because it's like a warm hug. Start slow and wait. Don't eat an edible in 10 minutes and go, I don't feel nothing, I'm gonna need some more. Next thing you know, you're gonna come over here in the parking lot. Make plans to stay home and watch a movie with your lover, your wife, or both.
High Times, and you are the CEO of Bang Corporation. And every time I use that name, I always spell it immediately, B-H-A-N-G. Can you tell us a little bit about... Okay, so what you're watching here is me interviewing the CEO of Bang Nation. That was the chocolate company that Jim Belushi was holding up in that show. And I got so excited when I actually recognized the brand Bang, or Bong, not Bong, but Bang. It's an Indian drink from the country of India. Anyway, this is the CEO. That's Jamie Pearson, and she was gracious enough to grant me an interview for In the Weeds. And speaking of In the Weeds, that is my podcast that I've done quite a few episodes of over the last 2 years. And we will have a fresh episode with someone named Emma Chasen out of Oregon. That'll be coming up following this live stream. Okay, so I know I've put out a lot of things out there, and I'm sure you're busily taking notes on everything I'm saying. No, I doubt that. I do check the clock because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, when we are live in studio, we will be taking a break at 4:20, 20 minutes after 4. Now, if anybody knows what that code is, you know, you can let me know on chat very quickly. But I can tell you this, okay? The year was 1971. This was when a bunch of high school kids from San Rafael, California, Steve Capper, Dave Reddix, Jeff Knoll, Larry Schwartz, and Mark Gravich, and basically they could all be my friends now, who are all age appropriate. They were in high school in 1971. I was in junior high school, and 1971, I admit it, that was the first year I actually tasted cannabis. Ooh. Needless to say, both my parents are no longer with us. I don't think I would actually have admitted that on live streaming television or whatever we're doing here, but that is actually a fact. So at 4:20, we will be taking a break every time we have a show and giving tribute to these guys. And by the way, I don't know, did we have any footage of them? Did we play any of the footage of the 420 guys? We have it there. Just roll it. Just let it roll. Just let it roll. And you can put it silent too. So this is courtesy of our friends at Chemistry. They've become cult figures in the cannabis world, these 420. They call themselves the Waldos. And the whole point is they used to meet at 20 past 4 at the Louis Pasteur statue in San Rafael. They'd meet after school and they would partake in their favorite activity, which was using cannabis, getting high. So that is why we decided to take this break at 4:20 and showcase a little bit about these guys, give you a little story about them, and there they are doing their thing way back when, and that was 4:20. Now, I will explain why we're going to take a break and play a great song by a pretty famous artist named Jonathan Edwards. He wrote this song back in the 60s. He lives in New Hampshire, and the song we're about to hear him perform is called Shanty. And, well, let's just say back in the 70s, when I was in junior high school and high school, Shanty was kind of our theme song because it was about sitting around and getting high. And that's what you did in the 70s. And that's what I did in the 70s, at least since I was class of 75 in high school, just like Jim Belushi mentioned, I might add. And there are the guys, there are the Waldos. So without any further ado, we are going to take a break. I want you to listen to Jonathan Edwards perform. He's performing at a local radio studio in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And we want to thank those guys for that. But sit back and enjoy the classic Shanty by Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just... you know, like every other night, just gonna lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh, mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh, mama, and put a good buzz on. On something, go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Sit down in my rented car, I'm gonna jam her into drive. Gonna head on and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Yes. So terpenes are our aromatic compounds, and that means that they give plants their smell. They are found abundantly in most plants in nature, even some insects. However, they are highly concentrated in the cannabis plant. And from the plant's perspective, they're really, really good at fending off any kinds of pests, pathogens, or predators. So they have a lot of insecticidal properties, and they also have quite a pungent smell and taste. So for animals who would come and munch on the plant, they really deter those munchers from attacking the plant. So they help the plant's survival. However, when we as humans consume them, they also have therapeutic applications within our own body. And actually, they're able to work together synergistically, as we call it, with the cannabinoids to amplify the therapeutic potential of the experience. And they do this by interacting with many different receptor families and physiological factors and targets in our body. A really common one is the serotonin system, which most people know serotonin is kind of our happy molecule. It's our mood stabilizer. And there are a lot of terpenes that can actually influence this system to promote anxiety relief and mood elevation and euphoria.
All right, that was Emma Chasen from Eminent Consulting, and she will be my guest on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, and that will be coming up following our live stream that will end at 6 p.m. tonight. Again, want to thank that station WSCA. That was a great bit with Jonathan Edwards. I got to tell you, I love that song. I could sing every word of that song, but I'm not going to do that, okay? It was awesome to hear Jonathan Edwards sing it at 420, and I'm hoping that will be a regular feature on our Cannabis Chat program. Once again, this is Education Day on Cannabis Chat, and what you heard Emma talking about were terpenes. Terpenes are she explained them. They basically steer the other cannabinoids in the flower that is cannabis. And she was great. She has an online certificate cannabis course where you could take and learn. There's so many people out there teaching the world about cannabis and this plant. There are universities that are picking up cannabis as a major or at least a minor. And sure enough, later on this show, we will talk to a professor from Colorado College named Santiago Guerra. I wonder if he's related to Richie Guerra. They're from Colorado, right? I don't know. I'm only kidding. Anyway, Richie Guerra is from Sensi Magazine. I thought I'd just mention that. Anyway, so Emma Chasen will be coming up. Eminent Consulting will talk more about educating the public about cannabis on the next edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. And again, that will be live streaming at 6 p.m. following this live in-studio discussion. And sure enough, we have a nice backdrop according to T. Simo. I know T. Simo too, and I appreciate that. Anyway, or maybe I shouldn't say that I know him. I don't know. Dan's shaking his head. I'm already driving my director crazy, by the way. And if there are any other former directors of mine out there, because there's been quite a few of them, I'm not going to name them, but I know who you are. You know who you are. That has also been a tradition of mine. It's just the way it is. When you deal with so-called people with personalities and talent, they will drive the technical people behind the scenes crazy. That's what we do, okay? Again, education drives the bus in the cannabis world. And there's so many elements about education with this plant. And I'm just talking about the science, for crying out loud, because you've got botanists, and sure enough, Emma Chasen, she went to Brown University, and she can be considered a botanist. She was Bud Tender of the Year in 2016 out in the state of Oregon. And we all know that Oregon's been a legal state, and as has Washington and California. In fact, I'm going to give a shout out to anyone out there in our live streaming land who knows the name of every state that it is a legal commodity in the United States. Pretty sure there are 11 of them. Don't name Washington, D.C., because that's a District of Columbia. Yes, it's legal in D.C., but there are 11 states where it is legal to possess cannabis. Now, one of the things that drives me nuts about the legalization of this plant is they legalize possession. So if you happen to carry it and you get arrested by a law enforcement person, or perhaps someone who targets others for that, sure enough, you get either a ticket or you go free. If it's under an ounce, for all these legal states, it's okay. They don't want you smoking in the cars, and they don't want you smoking in public. That's a pretty good thing. I don't know, though, how many people actually follow that, because I happen to know for a fact law enforcement does not want to make you put out your joint on the sidewalk, but they will make you do that. So that's kind of an act of civil disobedience if you do that, and the repercussions are, yes, you could be writing it, they could write you a ticket, they could hassle you, but for the most part, they're educating the public, and they're saying, you know what, you're not supposed to do that, just put out that joint, and you move on to the next thing. All right, now, speaking of the next thing, we talked a little bit about my podcast, In the Weeds with Jimmy Young, and we started that back in March of 2018. And I'll be honest with you, when Nick Gelso, who's the CEO of CLNS Media and a friend, suggested that I go to the New England Cannabis Convention and do a podcast on cannabis, I told him, I don't own a cassette recorder anymore. How am I going to record interviews? Yeah, I know, I'm old school. I get it. That's the way we used to do it. He says, no, you can get an adapter for your iPhone, and then you bring it in, you do your little recording thing, and sure enough, that's how we started the podcast. And we met some great people on that my first foray into the cannabis universe. I met the press secretary of MassCan, who's now out on her own. Her name's Maggie Kinsella. I can give a shout out to Maggie. I can give a shout out to Deirdre from Rev Clinics and Revolutionary Clinics, with 3 locations in the greater Boston area, is my go-to medical dispensary. And they also do a great job of wholesaling their flower in the state. And I also ran into a guy by the name of Stuart Zakem. Now, that last name should ring a bell to anybody in the greater Boston area who knows that there's a bridge called the Zakem Bridge that basically connects the northern part of the Boston area to the city of Boston. And it connects 93 going through the city of Boston. Back when I learned how to drive, there was actually a double-decker highway going right through the heart of Massachusetts, and right through the downtown Massachusetts, right in the harbor. It was the ugliest thing. It was horrible. And sure enough, a guy by the name of Tip O'Neill, you might have heard of Tip O'Neill. I think he was the Speaker of the House for about 30 years. Well, he figured out a way to get money into the state of Massachusetts so they could bury that double-decker bridge, and they called that the Big Dig. And then, sure enough, they decide to name the bridge after Stuart's older brother, Lenny, who was the Northeast director of the Anti-Defamation League for many years in the 90s and founded an event called Team Harmony that I am still involved with. And basically what Team Harmony does is it gives the youth of our nation an opportunity to get recognized for all the amazing things that they've done fighting all forms of discrimination and racism and anti-Semitism and all that horrible stuff that has divided this country so bad over the last, well, you know what? It hasn't been just the last year, okay? It's been decades that this has been going on. Now it's finally reached the bubbling point, the boiling point, and now we're actually trying to do something about that when we're not socially distancing, of course. Okay, so the Zakem Bridge, his brother, Stuart, pro-cannabis PR guy out of Manhattan, ran into him at that March 2018 New England Cannabis Convention, and he was one of my first interviews. Dr. Jordan Tischler was another one of my first interviews there, and that's how the In the Weeds podcast started in March of 2018. I'm amazed that we've done as many episodes as we've had. It's available on all the distribution channels out there like your Spotify's and your iTunes and your TuneIns and your few million others out there. Plus, they live on the Pro Cannabis Media YouTube channel, because anytime, for the most part, that I did an interview, I did it on camera, because I've always been on TV, so I'm more comfortable on camera than I am just doing an audio interview. And sure enough, that's how we started this thing, and we've had hundreds of episodes, thousands of downloads. In fact, if you add them all up, it's like a lot of people have listened to that podcast. And I'll never forget being out in Colorado for a training for Sensi magazine, and I'm in the room with this young person. He had to be in his late 20s. And he goes, you sound familiar. That name sounds familiar. Do you do a podcast called In the Weeds? And I was like, yeah, I guess I do. Couldn't believe it. It was by far the first time anybody had recognized me or knew of me through my cannabis content production and hosting. Because as I said at the beginning of the show, I really did have a decent career as a sports guy. And later on in this program, I will share with all of you what was the highlight of my broadcast career. And that was the day that we did a feature promoting the head of the Charles Regatta and a certain legend, a god, if you will. His name is Bobby Orr. Okay? And to this day, I maintain that Bobby Orr was the greatest hockey player of all time. Now, you can argue about Wayne Gretzky all you want, or Mario Lemieux, or Sidney Crosby, or anybody that's still playing now. Okay? Bobby Orr was the greatest hockey player of all time because he changed the game. He controlled the game from the defense. He scored 100 points, like, regularly. He was amazing. And he threw me in the Charles River. That's right. Bobby Orr threw me in the Charles River. And I'll explain that with a video a little bit later on this show. And again, if you're in the greater Boston area, you might recognize the names of Bob Lobel, Gary Gillis, Michael Barkan. They were all there to witness this. And it's sure enough, I was on every channel in Boston that day, and I had to get thrown in the Charles River to do it. And as pathetic as it is, that really is the highlight of my broadcast career. Now, I won the Emmy too. Well, that was nice. But let's face it, it was a lot of fun. It was an amazing day. And you will see me in a rowing shell. Pretty sure that's what it's called, rowing the scull, the rowing shell, with the Olympic team. And I'm rowing in that. And anyway, you know the story. If you win, you go in. Well, we won, and I went in. What can I tell you? That was the highlight of my my broadcast career. Let's go back to In the Weeds, okay? Because every week that I release a new In the Weeds, it'll be on Mondays during the week. It'll be part of right after the Cannabis Chat on Monday. We'll be doing this again Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And the first run of that podcast will be on Mondays. Now, why are we making an exception today? Because this is the first live stream that we've done from this studio, and Monday was Labor Day, and even though we showed a bunch of old programs, best of content of Pro Cannabis Media, we decided to save this one for right after this live stream. You'll see the In the Weeds with Emma Chasen and myself, and it's an interview that we did, and I enjoyed it. But one of the most fun things that I've started to do were these little promotional tidbits. I started doing them in my own yard. Sometimes I continue to do them in my own yard. It depends on where I am on the weekend, because I put it together as a promotional video. And I guess a lot of people, Dan, you even said to me, this is a good opportunity for me to talk to, because I'm not alone here, okay? I'm not talking to myself in the studio. There actually is someone in the studio pushing the buttons, making sure we're live streaming. His name's Dan French. He doesn't like to be on camera. He could punch himself up, but he wants to make sure that there's something better looking behind him than a blank wall. Okay, so we'll put up a picture or something. But in the meantime, Dan has friends who told me indeed they enjoy these little "where is Jimmy" moments. What is he doing now? Who's he promoting? Anyway, we put a whole montage together of that, and let's take a look at that now. Hey, Jimmy Young on the grass in the weeds at the International Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island. What does this have to do with In the Weeds with Jimmy Young? Absolutely nothing. But 3,000 miles away is Emma Chasen. She is a former Bud Tender of the Year in Portland, Oregon, and she'll be my guest on In the Weeds. She's an educator. Check it out on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young this week on the grass, or on grass, at the International Hall of Fame in Newport Hall of Fame in Rhode Island.
It was the green rush. They were going to make a ton of money and just kill it because it's legal weed. Who doesn't love legal weed? Everybody's going to want to come by. And that's just not what happened.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Well, another week and another weed and another good show on In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. I got to tell you about this guy, Rabbi Yaakov Cohen. Hey, coming up on In the Weeds this week, I'm in New Jersey in the weeds.
Jimmy Young on Helium in the Weeds this week. We've got a great guest.
Hey, Jimmy Young in the weeds this week with Uncle Pete Transmontane. Whoa, Jimmy Young in the weeds on the water this week. We've got the CEO of Kushko, Nick Kovacevic, with me. Jimmy Young back in the weeds again this week. And this week I've got Flower and I've got Tonic. And I've got Alyssa Merrill, who's the CEO of flowerandtonic.com. And we're talking about cannabis as a medicine. Have you noticed weeds are such a pain in the ass? God. I gotta go find some weeds. I gotta dig deep. All right. Well, there you go. There's the montage of all the promotional bits that we do for the In the Weeds podcast. And I hope you got a chuckle out of that. I know people enjoy that, so that's why I do it. And we'll have more as we continue along here. I'm actually never know where I'm going to end up being on a weekend to do one of those promos. So you might want to stay tuned to that. All right, this is Cannabis Chat. Holy moly, we got a bunch of people there. Wow. And okay, the river top. I'm waiting. I want to see if anybody was able to do all those states. Well, everybody likes my backdrop. I guess that's good.
Yeah, they're excited for the Bobby Orr River Toss.
The Bobby Orr River Toss. You're gonna have to stay tuned to the end of the show for that one. I can tell you that. There's one more video that is out there about me that we will be holding on to, and it has something to do with the Freedom Rally. I believe it was 2 years ago, the Freedom Rally. Not the one, Dan, you and I went to the last one. This was the year before. So I think, again, it was 2018. And unfortunately, because of COVID now, we're not going to have a Freedom. It's just, look, we're all going through this, all right? I don't want to go into the old unprecedented, we're all in this together stuff because everybody's tired of hearing that. We know we're in a historic time. We've all learned how to be germaphobes, okay? And again, this studio is large enough that I am a good 10 feet away from Dan French. And at this point, I would think, since he's on my computer, if I had it, he'd have it. But nobody has it, and let's keep it that way. And I hope everybody in your world is safe and healthy, too. All right, so we talked a little bit about the In the Weeds montage. We are going to have a special in-studio guest coming in at 5 o'clock. I've got one more special video that we prepared that will be coming up in just a few minutes. But let's go back to our regular Weed Talk News video that we do with Kurt Dalton from Cannabis.net. Now, this is a good time to talk a little bit about Kurt, okay? Because it was June of 2019 when I got a call, or I think he emailed me. He dug up my email on LinkedIn or whatever and reached out to me, told me that he was a founder of this website called Cannabis.net. And he admitted he actually used to watch my shows back in the 90s when I had a regular show on NECN Sports World with Jimmy Young. And he also said he was a Celtics fan. And anybody who's a Celtics fan is my brother. I mean, we're brethren. I bleed green. I love the Boston Celtics. Out of all the great sports teams in Boston, the Celtics are my favorite team. That goes beyond the Red Sox. It goes beyond the Patriots. It goes beyond the New England Revolution. And it goes beyond the Boston Bruins as well, who, by the way, still have some of the most dedicated, best fans in Boston. Boston is a hockey town. No matter what you hear about it being something else, it's a hockey town, okay? And it is the greatest sports town in America. It just is, because since the year 2000, you know, Boston teams have won just about every major championship you can, except for the New England Revolution, who are definitely the Buffalo Bills of MLS, because I'm pretty sure they've been to 4 MLS Cups and have lost them all. But back in the day, again, in the 90s, I was the color analyst, the original color analyst of the New England Revolution, with play-by-play broadcaster Derek Ray, who continues his awesome broadcast career for ESPN International. I've heard him call Women's World Cup games. I've heard him call Men's World Cup games. He's awesome. Derek Ray's a great guy. He was the press officer for the World Cup back in 1994 when it was in the United States of America. And of course, it is coming back here in 2026. So I'm always going to have some sports references during this program. Yes, we'll be focusing on cannabis. Yes, we'll be educating you about cannabis with little tidbits like what we did with Jim Belushi and what we did with Emma Chasen about terpenes. Terpenes? Terpenes, not terpenes, terpenes. So we will be educating as much as possible on Wednesdays. I was hoping to have a grower in here. One of the things I've learned is the growers are the goalies of cannabis. Now, the reason why I use hockey goalie as an example there, hockey goalies are a little, I don't know, off. Isabel, you're a hockey player, right? Sort of, kind of? Was, sort of? Anyway, there's an Isabel here, too. If think about it. Do you want to have hard rubber frozen shot at you 100 miles an hour on your body? You got to be a little, you know, off to be a hockey goalie. Same thing with growers. They're all a little bit off, but they're also great scientists because they can now dictate the DNA of this plant. It's amazing to me what they're able to do growing this plant from seedlings. And it's another reason why we're soliciting you growers out there for video of your grow farms and the names of the strains that you're growing. Now, we use footage before this from Alternative Compassion Services. We also have calls out to my friends at Rev Clinics. I'm sure we'll be getting theirs for our next show on Friday. But for now, I'm just kind of pontificating here about the grower cult of cannabis. And we, Pro Cannabis Media, just posted a great article by the Emerald Media Group on the Emerald Triangle in California, where 80% of the illegal market in the United States is grown. That's right, the illegal market. Now, there's certain farmers in the Emerald Triangle who have gone legit now too, and there's plenty of legal cannabis being grown in California, at least trying to avoid the fires that are there, and it's just horrible. Do we know anybody who lives in California, Dan? You don't know anybody who lives in California? Isabel, do you know somebody who lives in California? Yeah, who's that? Besides your mother? And oh, wait, Karen Solomon. Karen Solomon, we forgot to talk about Karen Solomon. How can we not talk about Karen Solomon, especially now that she can't call in, right? Karen Solomon is our new Vice President of Business Development of our multimedia agency for strategic marketing. And of course, I'm in charge of the video production side of things here at Pro Cannabis Media. But Karen and I worked together at the turn of the century. I know, that would be the 21st century, not the 20th century, okay? And we worked together at NECN, and we're coming up on a very special day in our nation's history, September 11th. We all recognize what happened on September 11th, one of the worst, probably the worst terrorist attack ever on the United States of America. But as I've explained to my son Gabe many, many times, more people were born on September 11th in history than died on that day. Does not take away from the tragedy of that day. Please do not misinterpret what I'm saying. But since my son was born on 9/11, 1990, and that was the greatest day of my life, okay? And he turns 30 years old on Friday. Karen is calling. She wants. Should we get her on? Should we experiment? Sure. All right, we're going to experiment. We're going to see if we can bring Karen Solomon in here. But what I was going to explain, and as it relates to 9/11. So Karen and I reconnected after many years. Karen, are you there? Not yet.
I am.
Oh, you are. Awesome. How about that? It works. This is Dan French gets a big plug there. And Karen, one of the most interesting things that has happened since you and I reconnected at the beginning of COVID, at the beginning of March, was through our conversations, we realized that we were in the same sales meeting at NECN on that tragic day in 2001 when the planes went into the towers in New York. Because I knew exactly where I was, you knew exactly where you were, and then we realized that we were in the same sales meeting with Ted Grosso and the team at NECN. Is that correct?
100% that's correct. I remember that day like it was yesterday.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't yesterday because it was, let's see, 2001, 2020, that was 19 years ago.
Right.
As I try to relate many times, Karen, as you know, it was a horrible tragedy. We all remember where we were that day. But my son was born on that day. And I remember having to go home to Franklin and run his 11th birthday party in the backyard that night. And we were all stunned. And one of the most eerie things that happened that day, as you know, all the planes were grounded. And Franklin, Mass. is in a flight pattern. And there were no planes in the sky over Franklin that day. And it definitely was noticeable. The silence was noticeable. But Karen Solomon's on the phone with us. Karen, first of all, you've been watching this. How are we doing?
Oh, you guys you're doing great, Jimmy. I love all the production. I love the shows. You're talking with everyone, sharing all your stories. It's great. It's really wonderful. Thumbs up. I see your thumb.
There you go. There you go. It's never crooked. None of my fingers are straight anymore, and that's one of the reasons why I've got arthritis.
No, this is a very exciting time in pro cannabis.
That's
Literally,
right.
in cannabis industry, this is a very exciting time for us to be live, talking about what is really top of conversation these days when it comes to cannabis.
100%. And the green wave continues in Washington, D.C. I believe 7 more states are voting on the legalization of cannabis at the ballot box in November. And, Pro Cannabis Media will continue to tell the stories of the cannabis industry through their own words. This is why I started this whole thing. I saw a couple of interviews by former comrades in the media when they interviewed either dispensary owners or lawyers that worked on the law, and it really looked like they hadn't done any homework at all, and that really bothered me. And so I just decided, you know what, I'm going to do the podcast. I was urged by Nick to do it. We started it up, and here we are in our own studio, streaming live. I think we're on all the social media outlets that we've got. Sort of, kind of.
Yes, yep, we do. And the best part, Jimmy, is that you and I reconnected.
Yeah. It has been, and it's great, Karen, because, and I don't want to age you, because I'm not going to tell you people your age, okay? But you have about 30 years plus in commercial media experience. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay. And we should also give a shout out to Karen. She had knee surgery last Friday, a torn meniscus, and she is on the mend. And I saw her actually walk today. So I know that she's getting back, and we can't wait for you to get back out on those tennis courts. And hopefully one day, Karen, we'll actually have an opportunity to hit a tennis ball across the net from each other sometime in our lifetime. Is that fair? Is that a date?
Oh, no, it's going to happen before then, for sure. It's going, as soon as I can get on a plane, I am on my way to Boston.
All right. Well, don't get on the plane yet, because right now we're gonna go back into the Wayback Machine. And I know your husband David listens to 98.5 The Sports Hub because he's a big sports fan, a big Boston sports fan. And a strange thing happened a few weeks ago when Kurt Dalton calls me on the phone. He goes, "You got to call 98.5." And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "They're talking about you on the radio on the Zolak and Bertrand show." And I go, "Oh, they're probably playing that clip from my show from Kid Company Sports World when Mark Bertrand, who's now the host of their weekday show, called in to my show, which was the Kid Company Sports World show special with Drew Bledsoe that did win me and us the Emmy Award that I got."
Right,
back
and
in-
how
in the
old
mid-
was how old was he? He was how old?
He was 10. Mark
young.
Bertrand was 10.
He
So
was 10 years
He's 35
old.
now.
Look
Do
at
the
him.
math, right?
Yeah, and now look at him running a show and one of the biggest shows on in Boston. Talk shows.
Absolutely. So
Sports
without any
shows.
further ado, Karen,
Yes.
let's roll the
Goodbye.
Wayback Machine, because I also saw that Hilary King is here. We'll get her situated
Oh,
in studio so
wonderful.
I won't have to talk to myself or to you. No
Oh,
disrespect.
that's great. Welcome, Hilary. Okay, thank you so much, Jimmy, for having me on.
Thank you for all your work too, Karen. We wouldn't be here without you, trust me. So now let's go to the Wayback Machine and hear what happened when I got on the radio again.
A disgrace. Was this like a kids-only call-in talk show?
Yes, it was.
Oh, that's
Yes.
nice.
That segment, yes. Yes, New England Cable News, Jimmy Young, who, I
saw him at a bar last year.
He loves that clip. I actually talked to him about it, I don't know, a year ago or so.
I talked about it too a year ago. I saw him in a Cape at a bar.
He was at, he was,
all the time.
Yeah, he was at an event with us at Mr. Sid's. I don't know, probably about a year ago, maybe more, maybe a couple of years ago.
Probably
but
2 years, yeah.
We had a laugh about it. We did.
So this is when I got a call from my co-host on Weed Talk Now, Kurt Dalton for Cannabis.net, and he's the one who called me up and said, "Hey, they're talking about you on 95, the Sports Hub." And I'm like, all right, they're playing that clip from the show again. Sure enough, I had an opportunity to call into the show.
Noontime on a Thursday. We've got to put our baseball conversation on pause for a moment, so we got to go to the phones.
Okay.
This is someone that we were just talking about a moment ago. Who's with us now? That would be Jimmy Young, joining us here on Zolak and Bertrand. Jimmy, what's up?
You know, you guys, it takes me back to the day when I had talent, ability, and a job. You know, I really appreciate your...
and last time I remember, curly, kinky hair, right?
Yes, thank you very much. And I just came off the tennis court. It's still curly and kinky, and I still have it, which is the best part.
That's good hearing from you, Jimmy. What's going on?
Nothing. I appreciate you guys, bringing it back from the dead. I'll never forget when Beetle and I met at that Mr. Sid thing, and he showed me the clip of the show that won me the Emmy Award at NECN back in the 90s, the sports special with Drew Bledsoe, when little Mark from Quincy would call in and ask Drew Bledsoe about what he thought of the Cowboys.
So
that
particular show won the Emmy, right, Jimmy? That was the show that won the Emmy?
Correct, and I hadn't seen a clip of that, Mark, honestly, in 25 years. And that's when you showed it to me on your phone, and you shared it with me. And by the way, I do proudly still have it on my phone. It's an honor to be remembered after all these years.
You're welcome. You're welcome for the Emmy, and you're welcome for being remembered.
Jimmy, where's that I saw you? Mashpee?
I do hang in Mashpee. I have friends with New Thievery and all that. But I ran into Mark at the Mr. Sid event in Newton. The Seagull Boys love to bring in the 98.5 guys and have a few drinks and what have you. And
they sure do.
Some good so they do a good job there, too.
They do, and hopefully we'll be doing that soon with them again. It's good talking to you, Jimmy. Be well, bud.
Hey, do you guys know what I'm doing now? It's the most bizarre turnaround in a career you've ever heard.
You were doing a lot of the media focused on cannabis, I recall.
Yeah.
Correct. I started a pro cannabis media network. I do Weed Talk news, from sports news to cannabis news. I'm not quite sure what that means to my career, but right now it's a lot of fun. I'm working with a guy named Kurt Dalton on Cannabis.net. And we've got thousands of followers. It's pretty bizarre.
I gotta get you in touch. I gotta get you in touch with my brother-in-law. He's one of the epic big guys in the cannabis company he works for.
Well,
he's more on the financial side, but yeah.
No, but we've talked to Bruce Linton. We've talked to Joe Lasardi, the CEO of Curaleaf. We talked to all the biggest names because we are building a cannabis coast-to-coast network. Pretty much a big undertaking, still fight that stigma every day, but it's amazing that I've gone from interviewing people like Drew Bledsoe and Scott Zolak to Steve D'Angelo and Tommy Chong. Okay, so there's a career for you.
If I were you, I'd rather hang out with Tommy Chong if I were you. Get more fun, have more fun there.
You know, you've done all right for a backup quarterback. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm doing all right, Jimmy.
I think
you're all right.
All right, Jimmy. Appreciate you guys remembering me for the plug. Keep up the good work, and I can't wait for sports to come back.
All right, Jimmy. Jimmy Young, formerly of NECN and the host of Kid Company Sports World. We won an Emmy for that show. Yeah, sure did. We won an Emmy. We won an Emmy for that one. So.
And by the way, Mark Bertrand, host of Bertrand and Zolak, you really had nothing to do with this, but I certainly appreciate going into the Wayback Machine and reminiscing about what was a great run on New England cable news.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
And we're back. Wow, look at that. And look, people, you won't have to listen to me talk for the next hour because Hilary King is with us.
Hi, everyone.
And Hilary and this is kind of an interesting story. So the last time we did a live show on Pro Cannabis Media, the date was March 13th. That was the day in Massachusetts. Well, actually, it was March 12th in Massachusetts that Governor Baker said, everybody go home and shut down, right?
Yep, that's when it all started.
And you were sick with the flu, and you tried to get a COVID test, and you couldn't. So you came on our show on March 13th to talk about it. And here's the pièce de résistance to that story. Of all the videos that we have done on YouTube, that's the only one they took down.
YouTube took it down.
YouTube took it down.
Community guidelines.
Community guidelines, because we were talking about COVID, right?
Misinformation, technically.
Thinking they were getting misinformation. Now, it took them 4 months to recognize that
wow.
And I don't know what misinformation we were giving other than saying, I think Kurt said something to you in jest. Maybe you should try a little weed. Maybe that'll get rid of the COVID or something, right?
Yeah, but as far as I remember, my response was like, the cannabis could help you relax and rest, and that's the state in which your body is going to be most able to fight off any kind of illness.
Right.
Right?
Right. Because it builds the immune system. That's the point, right? And anybody who knows me well knows I'm leaving my body to science. Whether science wants it or not, they can have it. I want you to study what's going on inside these walls. Hilary King, tell me what you're doing now, because it's kind of exciting for you.
It is.
And where you're working now and all that neat stuff.
It's super exciting. So I started in July with Northeast Alternatives in Fall River, which is a medical and adult use dispensary co-located in the same space. So we've got a grow, we've got a processing facility and a kitchen.
And is it Fall River? Where is it?
In Fall River, yeah. Pretty close to the Rhode Island border.
Yep.
And it's a great store, an amazing team. They're turning out some, award-winning flower.
Well, they won the Harvest Cup. I remember that about them, right?
They won 3 awards in the Harvest Cup last year, actually. They won 2 of the top 3 prizes in the sativa dominant flower category, and also 1 in the indica.
Okay, so let's chat, because Wednesday is Education Day here. I play the role of Professor Reed. I've just decided to do that. Sativa and indica. Now, the plant, according to Latin origination, is a cannabis sativa plant, correct? Okay, and we'd hope to have one here, but this is a stand-in.
This is as close as you can get.
This is our stand-in, and I thank Donna for that, because she was throwing it out, and I said, I'll take that, and I'll put it in my studio. Anyway,
there you go.
So, explain what is the perceived difference between the sativa and the indica, and then we'll get into the old, it really does depend on your own metabolism.
Exactly, it does. Everybody's different, but in general, what people used to say was that sativas are more of like a head high, more of a mental high, something that's going to energize you, something that will stimulate your creativity, maybe help you focus.
Definitely focus.
Yeah, and the indica, a little mnemonic device, they say indica couch.
Indica couch.
Meaning
like
it relaxes you, maybe a little more on the like sedating side, something that's going to calm you down more to have like at night.
Yeah, and earlier on the show, Emma Chasen, who is from Oregon and was the Bud Tender of the Year in 2016 out there, and she's got her own online certificate course, and she is my guest on In the Weeds. We run it right after this show. I had her explain what terpenes were. And terpenes are probably the most understood product in the actual flower. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a lot more known about those same compounds that terpenes are comprised of and what they do when they're like derived from other plants, right? Like aromatherapy, that's an accepted kind of alternative, not necessarily a science, but you know, it's a system of thinking about different kinds of plants and the essential oils and the compounds that can produce an effect. They're the same like chemical structure, like same compounds that you find in cannabis. For example, like linalool is found in certain strains of cannabis that tend to be more like calming and sedating, but it's also the main component of lavender. Right? So they're found in nature, but you know, like with anything with cannabis, the potential for research has been so restricted that in the United States, at least, we don't happen to have a lot of research about this stuff. And so most of it has been about the common cannabinoids, right? Like your THC, CBD, they're studying those. But it's only more recently that we're starting to see research come out about terpenes and also flavonoids, which are other little compounds that are in weed that contribute to the effect.
You know, I'm old, right? I mean, you roll it up, you use the album cover to get rid of the sticks and the stems and the seeds, right? And then you roll it up and you smoke it. We didn't know terpenes.
It's a whole new world of weed.
Hey, look
here,
at that.
Right?
I love Hilary. Man, I didn't even plant that. She just knew. I love that. And yet we joke, but it's true.
It's true.
And more amazingly about this, and I mentioned, you can dictate the DNA of this plant. So if you wanted to make a highly indica strain, a relaxing strain, or that focus strain, or you want to limit the amount of THC, or you want to create one with 2 times CBD and 1 time THC, you can do that too.
Yeah, and you know, it's not like, well, I guess maybe they are in some cases using like CRISPR technology to edit the genome and this and that, but really it's like traditional breeding techniques and identifying the genome and that sequencing it, and then, you know, using selective breeding over many kind of generations of plants to isolate and kind of, you know, promote the genetics that will express certain compounds over another, if that makes sense. So, you know, I don't know if people are like tweaking the actual genetics of it or if they're just using the information of the genetic sequence to select for their breeding. But either way, it's super interesting, and there's a lot more variety and new cannabinoids that weren't even tested for until recently that are coming out, and some of those can be found in hemp in greater quantities as well, like CBN, CBG. We're starting to see some of those things emerge. Also, delta-8 THC is something that's been kind of booming lately. So,
and do people come in and say, I really want a high delta THC9? I mean,
delta 9 THC.
Delta 9 THC, whatever. I mean,
actually, yeah.
Really?
Some people, most people don't really know that like delta 8 exists. I would say that one is a more emerging kind of cannabinoid. Yeah, that like isn't really naturally occurring in any large quantity. It's recent technology in the lab that has caused it to become more abundant in the marketplace, and so savvy consumers and people that are like the early adopters of all the new weed stuff, they're asking for delta 8 instead of delta 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And it is what it is. So you mentioned research. There's another news item today. I happened to notice this. I didn't see if it actually happened, but earlier today they said there is a House committee vote, not a House of Representatives vote, but a House of committee vote. Then they bring it to the full House to open up research on cannabis with the state legal grown weed.
In Massachusetts?
Well, again, it would be in legal states. So you know the legal states. All right. By the way, there'll be a quiz because I did throw it out there and I dropped my iPad because no one was paying attention to the professor. Of course you weren't. Okay. I really am trying to find out, does everybody know what the 11 states are? Now, we know what the 11 states are, right?
Yeah.
The toughest.
I'll list them for you after we're off the air.
Well, I could do them like that,
Yeah.
okay? But there's two in particular that people always forget about. Everybody remembers California, Oregon, Washington State,
Alaska.
Colorado. That's the one that people forget about.
Oh.
Alaska. You know, and Vermont, of course, it's legal to possess, but they haven't legalized it. It's in the legislature right now. So if this House committee opens up the door to research of cannabis in legal states. And the reason why this is an issue, people, okay, is for years during this so-called war on drugs that failed miserably, there's only one only one place in the United States that they could study it legally. It was the University of Mississippi.
And they weren't really growing, you know.
They were growing my weed.
Harvest Cup winning.
No.
Cannabis.
They were growing the weed that we used to, probably using the seeds from the 70s, right? And with 7% THC in it. And anyway, so they were studying, and that's the only place. So now, look.
Well, in Massachusetts, you know, we are the only state in the country that we have our own research license category in Massachusetts. And this current regulatory review period, the Cannabis Control Commission is actually promulgating a set of regulations around issuing those licenses and getting that program going. And there have been a handful of applications that have been kind of waiting in the queue, but they needed to fill out the regulations in order to start handing those research licenses out. So, you know, that's been kind of groundbreaking for Massachusetts. And they vote on September 24th. The commission will vote on the final regulations for this review, and hopefully that will remain included and we'll start to see some of those research licenses active in Massachusetts. That could be like research on growing conditions or a certain light, or, you know, actual consumption studies. You know, it depends on what they can get approved, but at least we have at the state level a proper license type so they can use cannabis grown in Massachusetts for their research. They're not allowed to sell it. Right, conflict of interest there, but
researching, getting to know what this plant does, how it interacts with humans, and again, every mammal has an endocannabinoid system, and that system controls the neurotransmitters in your brain that basically have to do with your immune system, your pain threshold, all that, your moods, right? All that stuff
inflammation.
It's all about inflammation, people, and you know. People look at my hands and they freak a lot of times because of the arthritis I have. But trust me when I tell you, I try to take not weed all day long, but you know, as much CBD, turmeric, depending on which side of the issue you're on, as much as I can. And, you know, by the way, it's Western medicine, Eastern medicine. I don't care. Just give me the medicine. I'll try anything pretty much, except changing my diet. Ooh, I knew that would make somebody upset out there. This is live TV. This is when I get to just kind of wing it because I had my notes here and now I threw them on the ground and now I can go back to my notes and flick my wire over here. See, this is all the stuff that you don't see on real TV, but we know what's going on. Let's go back to the stigma for a second. It's always the go-to subject.
Yeah.
We still face this every day. You could walk up to 100 people and just say one word to them, cannabis, and 100 people will have an opinion.
Do you think that it would depend on how old they are?
Yeah, I do. But I mean, let's face it, Hilary, I'm old. And I know a lot about it. Right? And the only reason why I know about it now is because I've interviewed and talked to people like yourself and others in this space and learned by listening to them. You've
exposed yourself to it and you've sought out the information, right?
Right. And the scientists, by the way, the most intelligent interviews I've ever done, and I don't think any of the sports guys I know out there, any of the past athletes that I've interviewed are going to get upset by this. These PhDs in the science directors of the various testing labs and the each dispensary has, you know, they're the smartest people I've ever met. They use words and I'm like, I forget not knowing the meaning of the word. I'd never even heard some of the words that they're saying, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't do chemistry in high school or college, and I did another kind of chemistry in college, let's just say, with Horace. Maybe some of my fraternity brothers remember Horace. You know, when you go to college in the 70s, you'd name your bong. You'd name your bong, you'd name your pipe or whatever, right? It had a name.
It's your companion.
It was Horace, okay? And if there's any of the Theta Chi's from Tufts out there that are watching, they're laughing right now. Because this is the thing. I've come out of the cannabis closet. I don't care. At this point in my life, this is who I am. This is what I've done. I take it medicinally now. And I've got a card. It's legal in my state. And more importantly, I'm trying to help the industry talk about this.
Yeah, but I think that the lingering effect of, reefer madness propaganda.
Yep, it's still there.
And the war on drugs that, is still arresting people for cannabis in some places in the country.
Oh, my God.
I think that has kind of cemented a negative, viewpoint and closed off some people's minds that maybe of, an older generation, that as we see the, younger generations now, it's ain't no thing. They're pretty accepting of it and don't necessarily even understand what the big deal is,
Well, it was a big deal when they dropped weed from the sky in Tel Aviv this week.
I saw that. How cool. I wonder if anybody got in trouble for that. Did they?
No, the promoters. And it's really interesting.
Worth it.
Oh my God, it's all over the world. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's brilliant. By the way, the Israelis were very influential in this. In fact, the endocannabinoid system was discovered by a Israeli scientist in the 60s.
Raphael Mechoulam. They've been ahead of
Wait, hang on a second. Hillary, say that name again, please.
Raphael Mechoulam.
I love that.
Great name.
It's a great name, and it was like Mahacham somebody, and if you knew it, you rolled it. It was great.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Yep.
But they've been ahead of the rest of the world in terms of cannabis research. Their research on terpenes coming out of Israel and the range of cannabinoids that they test for, it would blow your mind. Dozens that we don't even know exist, and we only test for a small panel of them. Right. Whereas they're testing all these different kinds of compounds, and they've been kind of the world leader in cannabis research. It was super cool to see that drone drop situation, because it's what are we all doing here if it's not for the liberation of the plant and getting it into the hands of anybody who wants it?
Right. And you know what? We'll give the Belushi group another plug. I know. Actually, you texted me because you watched the show.
I watched it.
Okay, now hang on. We've already played a clip of Jim Belushi.
Oh, really?
The Cannabis 101 about the edibles, where he plays the role of the professor. And it's really
those are the clever little segments. I like that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, I happen to think the scripting, and it is scripted, Hillary. You are right. It's very scripted.
Scripted.
But it's very clever.
Yeah.
It really is.
The only thing I would say about that is did they really kill an entire table of Captain Jack just for the show? That's really the only thing that bothers me about it being scripted.
I think they used a stunt plant for that, right? A stunt plant would
Hopefully.
make sense, right? And then they just...
Otherwise, it's just a waste of medicine. I mean, and I don't know. It's seems like they're recreating what actually did potentially happen behind the scenes in some of these conversations that they're having, but... I don't know, just a waste of good medicine to kill all those plants just for the sake of the show and the drama of it. I don't know.
And the reaction, and look, he's an actor, okay?
Yeah.
He's a professional actor.
Entertainer,
musician, entrepreneur. I love the interaction with him and his cousin and his kids, which I think are great. This is 2020. This is what I want to see more of, is normalcy. Acceptance of this. And it's not really stoner content. They're not telling you what strains are awesome to you got to try this, you're going to get so wasted. They're not doing that. They're actually legitimizing it through farming, because he's a farmer.
Agriculture, yeah.
Right.
It's a crop.
It's a crop. Now, speaking of which, okay, and we're going to get to Canatini in a minute here.
Ooh, yeah.
I saw this today, and first of all, let's go back to the dropping of the weed. That was on September 3rd. Happened to be my birthday. Okay,
Happy
my
belated.
promise, the promised
Yeah.
land.
Oh, I did text you happy birthday.
Yes,
I
you
remember.
did.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you to all of you out there who texted me, wished me a happy birthday on Facebook and LinkedIn. And if I haven't gotten to you, forget about it. I'll just wish you a happy birthday the next time because there's so many freaking people out there. I just appreciate everybody who knows me that.
Is this about the rolling papers?
Yes. So Leafly.
I saw the headline. I haven't read the article yet.
Okay, so Leafly did an investigation. And by the way, I have a ton of respect for Leafly. Bruce Barcott, their editor. Kurt and I did an interview with him. We'll be airing that on our Twitch TV channel because we're doing like the best of now.
Oh, cool.
And we're streaming it. We'll be streaming right through the Celtics game up till 10 o'clock tonight.
Nice.
Now, my man Dan French here is going to be in charge of it. He 11? Holy mackerel. So we're on, we've got a lot of stuff that we'll be streaming after this. Well, this stream is just going to continue.
With all the best PCM content.
A lot of good stuff. I mean, and I think repurposing it, this gives us an opportunity to do that in addition to continuing to produce 2 new pieces of content every week. My In the Weeds goes out on Mondays, the Weed Talk News with Kurt Dalton on Fridays, and we're going to do Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays here in the studio, 2 hours. Although I got to tell you, I haven't done 2 hours of talk in a long time.
Yeah.
And we don't have commercials on this.
Well, you got a break at 4:20, I heard.
I got a break at 4:20, courtesy of our friends Jonathan Edwards. I'm so excited that I found that. I connected with his manager, and I want to do an interview with him.
Yeah.
Because his song in the 70s was our theme song. We weren't the Waldos, okay? We didn't create 420, but it was the same time frame. And my friends, I got a Mark, and I've got a John, and I've got I got friends.
Yeah.
Anyway, so nearly 1 in 10 rolling papers failed California's stringent standards for legal cannabis product purity. So this means that
the rolling paper itself?
The rolling paper
the empty
itself.
paper.
Yes.
They're just testing the empty paper?
Yes. Okay, papers are made of plant material and plants. They absorb the contaminants from the soil. Paper crops also get fumigated to deter pests. I'm reading this from the Leafly article. Rolling papers, this is why talking about cannabis is more than just what is your favorite strain, okay? Rolling papers, just rolling papers, is a $1.2 billion global industry.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
Now, it's generally less regulated than other segments of the tobacco and cannabis industries, though paper manufacturers, it says, must list their ingredients. So they hired a lab, and they started looking at all this stuff. They tested 70 rolling papers, 25 pre-rolled cones, 20 wraps, and they found, first of all, they found arsenic, they found lead, they found pesticides. I mean,
wow.
Okay.
So we might have a situation where the cannabis that's going inside a pre-roll is healthier than the paper that they're wrapping it in, and there's no state regulations requiring that testing, but they have to test the flower.
Another reason why, though, I support the legal cannabis industry, I want to make it continue to be researched, checked by our friends, the journalists, because Leafly does a great job with journalism, whether you agree with their opinion papers or not, but they really do a great job. And that came out, it says September 2nd, Mitchell Colbert wrote this. And, it is concerning.
Yeah.
It is concerning. Okay. Canatini, infused adult chews from the Northeast Alternatives, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
I printed it for you.
This is our first brand that we're launching as part of the wholesale program.
Yeah, we can hold it up. Back in the day, Johnny Carson would hold it up to a camera. You guys don't even know who Johnny Carson is, but it would be a tight shot. We don't have anything but a lockdown camera. Look,
I brought
by the way,
actually
there are three or four people that should be doing the work in this studio. Dan French is doing it all by himself.
This is actually, it's empty, but this is like our initial packaging for the Canatini brand. This isn't the final one. It'll look like that.
Yep.
But, for the first round of product, comes in these really cool jars.
Wait, go back to the jar, because we're going to talk about Mr. Belushi talked about the childproof, and he was, trying to open it.
Yeah, see how it's got that little inner lining in there?
Okay, so is it literally a screw top?
It is, but you do have to kind of like push down and get the clip.
Push down and turn it.
Yeah.
I can. That's one of the few that I can handle with my fingers. I
What
can't tell you
about-
how many times I've taken a knife to a
Yeah.
concentrate.
Even these
Take
bags,
this over.
you know, they give
bags-
me a little trouble sometimes.
Well,
you got to
that
kind
was
of pull them sideways.
Sure
like-
enough, when I went to my first medical dispensary in 2013, and they were handing out those white, I just got a waft.
That's the ice cream,
It's
man.
not smell-o-vision.
That was one of the ones that won Harvest Cut. To me, it smells like honeydew melon, and almost like a sweet, like cardamom kind of like super yummy. Like, just makes me want to just like huff my grinder.
Huff your grinder. Okay.
Yeah, just smell it.
Okay.
Just keep smelling it. Grind it up, you know.
There are a lot of people who find the smell abhorrent too. You know that.
Yeah, that I don't really understand. You know, I mean,
I find cigarette smoking abhorrent.
Yep.
Even cigar smoking, unless it's on the golf course.
what about blunts?
That's the mixed one, right?
That's when you would use like a tobacco leaf
Yeah.
instead of a rolling paper.
Yeah. Well,
Or like a natural,
again, a plant.
like a whole leaf, and then you cut up a little like.
Right, a plant.
Yeah.
But the plant obviously has some pesticides on it, and I know that there is a list of approved pesticides, right? That these growers have.
Well, not for cannabis. For tobacco, probably, or for other plants.
They test for pesticides when MCR Labs or CDX gets them,
Yeah,
right?
of course they do. But like, since cannabis is federally illegal, there's no approved pesticides that are approved for these crops. So like, at the federal level, like they have to make sure that they say yes, you can use this specific pesticide with this specific name on the label, and that's what's allowed. But there's no list like that for cannabis that exists because it's not federally illegal.
Gotcha. And you know, and this is why another reason why I don't want to learn how to grow it. I still maintain I have a black thumb that I tend to kill plants. Now I've kept my deck plants going all summer.
You're doing fine with this one.
This one is my prized possession. It will never die. In fact, even when my life partner, Miss Donna, threw it out, I decided to save it. I said, I've got a use for you. You come with me. You know, I might even do an In the Weeds promo, you know, sticking my head through the grass or something, you know, because I tend to do that. So,
Canatini,
keep going. Tell me more about. And you are involved with the wholesale operation?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm the director of wholesale. So it's my job to bring our products to other dispensaries across the state, which now will include delivery-only retailers, which is super exciting.
Now, I was gonna let's talk about that because that's a bit of a controversy in Massachusetts. They've opened up. Look, another factor in the movement to legalize cannabis. Mm-hmm. Is to give those who have been most impacted on the failed war on drugs an opportunity, the social equity applicants, an opportunity to get into this business, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also expunge some of the past records. You know, we always mention Last Prisoner Project and Steve D'Angelo's efforts to get all prisoners who are in jail now for nonviolent cannabis crimes out of jail. And have their records expunged.
Yeah. Something that kind of keeps me up at night, to be honest, now that my job is to sell large amounts of marijuana products, and yet there are people that are still like being prosecuted for it and sitting in jail for it, or being ineligible for a license because they were involved with it.
Right. And the good news is the movement to legalize includes this social equity opportunity.
Well,
it does. In most states,
the law included it at the state level in Massachusetts. It's legally mandated at the commission level. But
how's that worked out, Hilary?
It hasn't worked out because there was no matching local municipal level mandate for equity. Right. And so that basically allowed for local corruption and pay to play and things like that happening.
Now, I believe there was a mayor of Fall River who had a little problem there, just want to say.
He had a big problem.
Yeah, I guess so.
And of course, obviously, Northeast Alternatives is in Fall River.
Right.
But you know me. You know my ethics.
You would never be involved with a company.
And I wouldn't have accepted this job if I didn't look them in the eye and ask them directly and know that they were not involved. They weren't. They were a witness in this case, and they testified as a witness, not involved, that they, had never been approached about it. They didn't offer anything.
We're talking about bribery of a local official.
Yeah, and that was like, a case that kind of stemmed way beyond the cannabis industry too. Like he was running that game in Fall River, in all other kinds of industries and businesses. And I actually just read the indictment like the other day, and it's pretty robust. But yeah, that's an example of the kind of thing that has held up, held up licensing around Fall River, including ours that we're still waiting for, even though we weren't involved. But the point is that the opportunity for things like that to happen, including less sinister versions of it too, right? Like asking for extra money in the host community agreements that a smaller business maybe couldn't afford, and prioritizing based on how much is going to come into that town's coffers. Like even that is less like corrupt than other situations, but the result is that it's shutting out social equity applicants, economic empowerment, small mom and pop businesses, and the people that were more likely to have been involved with the plant, bravely before it became legalized. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And unfortunately, despite the commission's best efforts, mostly due to Chilean title, any of the programs that they've put in place at the commission level haven't really been backed up by any local equity mandate other than the one that was able to be passed in Cambridge and a similar equity ordinance in Boston. And what's, news about the Cambridge situation, I don't know if you heard, but Rev Clinics recently lost.
Lost another one.
Yeah, but that if that ends up being the final conclusion of the case, then any municipality would be able to enact their own priority period.
All right, we're trying to reach a professor at Colorado College right now who has...
Hello?
Is this Santiago?
Yes, this is Santiago.
Santiago, my name is Jimmy Young, and you're live on the Cannabis Chat program with Hilary King out of Boston, Massachusetts. How are you, Professor?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Good. So I'm fine. All right, I have the standard line. I'm good enough. I'd like to talk with you a little bit about what you teach. I've heard you on other interview shows, and I do want to talk about the origins of the word marijuana and why a lot of people think that is a racist term. Can you get into that right away for us? Because I've heard you pontificate about this.
Yeah, so at least in terms of the U.S.'s relationship to the term marijuana or marijuana, it really comes from this sort of relationship in the U.S. Southwest to Mexico and to Mexicans. So cannabis gets introduced into the Americas. It's not indigenous to any part of the Americas, but it's introduced by Europeans, primarily the Spanish, into Mexico as part of an effort to really try to increase hemp production for access to rope and textiles from hemp. But in the process, of cannabis adapting to the natural geographical setting of Mexico, it becomes much more psychoactive than what the Spanish were used to. In the process of that, the Spanish were really trying to Christianize people in Mexico, indigenous people in Mexico, and they took away all of these psychoactive plants that these people in Mexico were using, but they gave them this sort of replacement, this substitution in cannabis. And because they were being Christianized, they sort of developed a way to code the use of this new plant using terms like Rosa Maria, La Virgen Maria, all these terms that were part of this new Christianized language that they were adopting, and eventually it sort of morphed into the term that we know now, marijuana. But in the early 20th century, as the U.S. is starting to see sort of tensions along the U.S.-Mexico border and increased migration from Mexico, they start to see this sort of increased presence of something that was popularized by Mexicans, which is the consumption of cannabis in smokable form, in smoked cigarette form, usually corn husk cigarettes. and they thought of this as a sort of threatening presence, that this was going to contribute to violence, to murder, and all these things. And so it was stigmatized. The actual practice of smoking cannabis as marijuana was stigmatized through its relationship with this Mexican population. So that's sort of like the rough, long sort of history of our relationship to cannabis. I know you asked about, and it's something that I really talk about a lot, which is the rejection of the term because it's racist. One thing that I like for especially people in the cannabis industry to see is that the term itself is not racist. It's a word that gets sort of scapegoated through the racism that at the time people have for Mexicans. People in the U.S. are starting to build this resentment and this racism towards the Mexican population in the Southwest because they're being viewed as foreigners, as invaders, and so they transmit this sort of negative sentiment towards the term that this population has for this substance, this plant. And so now in the present, we're trying to, people in the cannabis industry and with the relationship to cannabis are trying to look back and argue that the term is racist. But in many ways, the term itself is not inherently racist. It's sort of like the negative attitudes that we tied to that term and to the population where the racism lied, but not in the term itself.
First, Santiago, thank you so much. Now, also with me in studio is Hilary King. She is a representative of a local dispensary in the Massachusetts area. And I am the host of this show. This is the debut, so I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about what you teach at Colorado College in relation to the cannabis space?
Yeah, so I teach a few different classes, 3 specifically that focus in on and deal with cannabis. So I've taught a course that's just devoted to the history of cannabis from its arrival to the Americas and sort of transmission around the world, to this sort of longer history within the U.S. Context and the context of the Americas of what the prohibition and this sort of legal and cultural history looks like. And occasionally I co-teach that with a colleague who's a professor in economics, Jim Parko. He's also a marijuana business owner, owns a dispensary and some other ancillary businesses. And we teach in that course sort of the business dynamics and licensing and sort of like a holistic view of cannabis from the colonial period basically to contemporary legalization movements and business operations. Another course I teach is just focused on the larger picture of the drug war and drug policy, and that one's just simply titled The Drug War. And then this last course that I teach, that I'm currently teaching right now, it's called Ritual and Medicine of the Southwest, which really deals with traditional medicinal practices of indigenous people and Mexican people in the U.S. Southwest and in Mexico, and a big portion of that really deals with sort of how cannabis really enters Mexican traditional medicine, starting in the 1500s into the present, and then thinking about the relationship of cannabis to other psychoactive plants that are utilized in the Americas.
Hilary, do you have something you wanted to comment?
Yeah, that's really interesting. But going back to the marijuana word, I read a quote earlier today that from Harry Anslinger back in exactly, but he said back then there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing results from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. So you know, like your point about how it's not the word itself inherently, but it's how it was used and how it was weaponized to engender and promote the stigma and the negativity around it, probably likely in order to justify the war on drugs, right? But I've also heard people, even in my cannabis community here in Massachusetts, insist that they keep using the word marijuana so it doesn't get whitewashed and so that history doesn't get erased, and almost as like a reclamation of that word and taking more, you know, control and reclaiming the story around that for themselves. So I don't know what you think about that. I understand both sides of it, and I guess I think it would be up to the individual and the person, you know, how they feel about it. But
as an educator, you have to educate, right, Santiago?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a professor and I'm an educator. So for me, you know, for me the reliance on these words really allow us to hone in on you know, on where we you know, where we are indebted to certain cultures around the world for their contribution to cannabis knowledge, right? And I think you know, I wouldn't impose on others to say, well, you have to use this word, but I would say there's a lot to be learned from, you know, from the reclamation of the word marijuana in terms of, you know, without, in many ways, without Mexican people, we wouldn't have the same sort of reliance that we developed on, for example, smoking joints, right? Like that's got a strong tradition within the Mexican relationship to cannabis that in many ways gets adopted in the U.S. and becomes one of the mainstays of cannabis consuming culture, you know, for a long period of time. And in similar ways, there are ways in which we have all these words that are present in the cannabis industry that haven't received the same attention, right? Like, you know, words like ganja, words like bong, that have this long history, whether it's in primarily in traditions of Southeast Asia that we've sort of imported and adopted, and we use on a daily basis around cannabis
kind of
consumption.
culturally appropriating.
Right. Yeah, and we don't know many of us I would say don't even know the knowledge of that longer history of this. You know, bong originally is a sort of infused cannabis drink that's being consumed in Southeast Asia long before Europeans even have a relationship with the cannabis plant. You know, African people are smoking using water pipes that they also refer to as bong. So there's ways in which I think you know, the cannabis industry would benefit from, right, increasing our knowledge about these practices by looking further into where these words originate and what they key us into in terms of this long history of both prohibition of the substance as well as just sort of the cultural contributions of people around the world to cannabis consumption.
I think it's just amazing, Professor, that, you know, you are teaching this at a college in the United States of America in 2020. I'm 63 years old, so I'm not afraid of saying that. Needless to say, we weren't doing a lot of in-classroom study of cannabis in college when I was in college, but there was
extracurricular.
There was definitely a lot of lab work, let's just say, okay? And that being said, I want you to look into your crystal ball. You know the movement towards legalization. You're in a legal state, Colorado, which kind of paved the way. I think you've been, is it 10 years now that it's been legal in Colorado? I think it is.
Well, depends. If you take the medicinal calendar, medical marijuana sort of like timeline, or the, you know, the retail adult use. But, you know, we're over a decade in terms of medical legalization, and approaching the decade in terms of adult use retail legalization. So yeah, we've got our years already.
Yep, and you've seen the benefits. There's been tremendous research done on youth use and how it's actually declined in Colorado. And again, it goes back to educating the public. Now, you're educating the public because you are in a classroom doing that, or at least hybrid these days. I don't know what's Colorado College doing as far as students on campus and in classrooms.
We're currently in a sort of hybrid sort of space. But we're mostly doing remote teaching. But I think to your point, we've seen the sort of the outcomes of what even just in these last few years, the offering of courses like this has contributed to student education. We've had a few of our students that have come through our courses go into either testing, like testing of cannabis products for quality and assurance purposes, other students that have gone into business operations, and other students that have opened businesses themselves here in Colorado as a result of the courses we've been offering. So,
can I ask a question about the differences between an online certificate course that may be available for a few $100s versus classroom hours? How many hours in the classroom, or at least credit hours, are some of these courses that you offer?
So we have an interesting, unique system. We're a highly selective liberal arts college, and so sort of our bread and butter, as it were, is that we have a lot of contact hours with our students. We follow what's called a block schedule system, and that's students take only one course for 1 month at a time. So they're taking a new course every month, but during the month that they're taking that course, they're essentially only working on our course. So in the cannabis course that we teach with my colleague in economics, we send them out and have them do business analytics of some dispensaries or growing operations. They engage in some policy work, and so they're doing they're essentially working 8 to 5 on a lot of this material actively, and then doing a lot of studying in the after hours. So I think it's in terms of our approach, we really feel like this hands-on approach, this in-person learning from. We bring in a lot of people in the industry to give guest lectures and things like that. So we think this particular model that we follow of intensive learning in person is a real benefit to our students.
And I know how challenging it is. I was at Emerson College this past spring semester, and on March 12th was my last in-class class, and then finished the rest of the semester online. But as someone who likes to engage with people, I managed okay. My students gave me great marks, and that made me feel good. Santiago, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us. I will make myself available if you think there's any need for your students to hear how a sportscaster got into the cannabis talk business. All right?
Well, thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was Santiago Guerra from Colorado College. And Hilary, it is, you know how they say this isn't your dad's weed anymore? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Education in a college, cannabis, and I know now there's quite a few courses out there. In fact, we're streaming one with Rob. I did an interview with Rob Mejia out of Stockton University, and he does 3 courses, and he's got an online as well.
Well, there's courses in Massachusetts at Holyoke Community College and Roxbury Community College. Actually, the Mass Cultivated program actually offers courses and internships and learning at Roxbury Community College, and then the students as like fellows get placed in internships with actual cannabis companies. Isn't that cool?
Believe me, first of all, I think, and I've been a adjunct professor for about 11 years. I've also thought of myself as a teacher and coach my entire career because I coached soccer for many years, and now I teach young people or anybody who wants to be an on-camera talent or whatever. But the education system in our country is broken, and it has to be changed. There is a systematic placement in the cities that keeps those that are in the city in a certain place in our world. And it has to change. The Celtics, I'm going to give them credit because, I'm a big Celtics guy and they play tonight, have just $25 million to create programs to help inner city education. That is what I want to see by the athletes. And I'm going to see that. I'm also going to see something else. And if you'd like to stick around, I'd love to show you this. This is my broadcast career in a nutshell, okay? I think it was 1995. You see the lineup there. Michael Barkan, Bob LaBelle. I'm going to look at it again. Am I missing one? Oh, yeah, there's Bobby Orr and myself and Gary Gillis. And each one of the sportscasters was put into a shell, a racing shell, for the head of the Charles Regatta. Baybanks was the sponsor back then. Bobby Orr was the spokesperson. So they put Bobby Orr in the Bankers boat, and it was the Anchors versus the Bankers promotion. Get it? Okay. So that's how I ended up getting thrown in the Charles River by Bobby Orr. And I was on every channel.
That's a good story.
And I was on every channel. I know, I say it. I was on every channel in the Boston market, but I had to get thrown in the Charles River by Bobby Orr. So let's take a look at this. You'll enjoy it, and then we'll come back and say goodbye. Okay, so here's the lineup for the Sports Anchors versus Bay Bankers River Sprint. Bob LaBelle, Michael Barkan, Bobby Orr, Gary Gillis, and me.
Now, none of us had ever really raced in a racing shell before or even carried one. So before we start to go, we start with the shoes, which are already taped to the boat. Well, the shoe fits anyway.
I've always been taught is that poetry in motion is an analogy. Is that when the boat is hovering in the water and moving effortlessly.
Did he say effortlessly? Oh my! Hey, that effort turned into a winning time of 31:02. We won! Right? I never won anything in my life! Now, while winning brought a $1,000 donation courtesy of Baybanks for Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, there is another lesson about winning at crew that I was about to learn.
But you have a surprise in store for you because the winners always get wet.
They're going to dump me in the water. No. 1, 2, 3. Well, now I know why you row on the river, not swim in it.
And we're back. So, and the best line after it was shown at Channel 5 in Boston, WCVB, we'll give him a plug because Bob Halloran's my good friend and he's still over there. Mike Dowling, who was anchoring that day, had a great line after this.
What did he say?
Sometimes it's just not worth winning. And that was great. And
I think everybody won that day.
Hey, you know what? And that's what I like in life. I want to create deals and experiences so that everybody wins. And because we have so many things wrong in our world right now. And if I can control anything, I can control this live stream. I can control what Pro Cannabis Media does and wants to do.
Well, I think a lot of the things that are wrong in the world right now, an argument could be made that you can trace it back to marijuana prohibition and how it was used as like justification for brutalizing certain communities or withholding, things like affordable housing and jobs and stuff due to, convictions. And it's also wrong.
It is wrong. And do you remember, this is history, I'm going to put you on the spot, who funded Reefer Madness and created the DEA that was led by Harry Anslinger? Do you know who did that? You'll recognize these two names.
Specific names? Is it like the DuPonts and the like?
One more. I mentioned WCVB.
You tell me the other one. What's the second?
Well, Hearst.
The Hearst, yeah.
Okay. And they were in the publishing business, and they saw
timber.
They saw hemp as a threat to their industry, and then because of the racism that was it was. Look, we had the Jim Crow South back then. We still had to pass the civil rights law in the 60s. I mean, and we're still fighting that battle. If you don't think Black Lives Matter, you are wrong. Okay? That's just how I feel.
I
agree. Hillary, I know you do agree, and we both are on that same side, which is great. But you have show and tell, and that's what we're going to end this, because this is an education. Every Wednesday we're going to be talking about education. You are going to learn for whatever reason, you're going to learn about cannabis. And now Hilary is going to show
Yeah.
us her little bag of tricks that she brought in from her Northeast Alternatives group out of Fall River. Do they
So
have
I did
another,
some shopping.
another location yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
We don't yet, but a couple more stores are in the works.
Good.
And I'll be really excited to share that with you when I can.
Well, terrific.
Well, okay, so first of all, this is Canatini. So this brand was actually created after
is an edible.
It's an edible. It's really yummy gummies. They're
Okay.
delicious. So the whole
I'm going to ask you, each
Yeah.
gummy is how many milligrams?
at least 5 milligrams, no
Okay.
more than 5.5. There's a little variance
Good.
there. So ours
Good.
are always 5 milligrams.
Right, because that's a dose and again, if you're new to it, you start low and you go slow. You could even cut that gummy in half, right?
For example, this batch is 5.39 milligrams of THC.
Per piece.
Per piece.
There you go.
Yeah.
And the average adult dose is about 10. At least that's what I've been learned, or that's what I've heard from doctors. You know, the doctors we
Yeah.
talk to, and the nurses. Our friend, Sherry Tuckis from the Green Nurse Group.
Do you want to try one of these?
Not right now.
Maybe later?
I will tell you this. I don't like to partake when I have to actually perform and actually think on camera.
Yeah.
But trust me, there's only a few minutes left in the show, and the Celtics are on in 30 minutes. And as much as I'd love to watch my old stuff, I know what it looks like.
So these are what the gummies look like. And
Yep.
if you look closely, you can see the little THC symbol
Oh, yeah.
right on there.
Yep,
That's
yep.
part
Branded.
of
It's
the mold.
branded in
yeah.
there. Cool.
And so these ones are appletini flavor, like an apple martini. And so that's kind of the whole point behind the Canatini brand is they tested out over 100 different flavors and really came up with some delicious stuff that are inspired by like adult beverages and cocktails. So we have like
We're going to start infusing too, aren't we?
yeah, exactly. Well, not actual alcohol, but really drawing the inspiration for the flavors, like cherry limeade martini, tropical white sangria. Those are the two flavors that we just launched.
Yep.
Shout out to INSA in East Hampton, Springfield, and Salem. They're the first company, the first store stocking our Canatini gummies.
There you go.
So
that's very cool. And
yeah.
is that your client? Is that your client?
Yeah, they're one of our very first wholesale customer.
Fantastic.
And
I know a
yeah,
lot of
so you
owners
can,
that I could introduce you to. I just want to say.
Absolutely.
I think a couple in particular.
This one, these are gummies as well. These are called Possum Fruit Punch. Not awesome, but possum.
Possum. Is
P-A-W.
Oh,
It's possum. Yeah. And it's because we donate 10% of sales of these gummies to a local animal shelter.
There you go.
And
that's what the cannabis industry really is.
Yeah.
They're trying to be socially responsible.
And we're going to start
capitalists.
doing the same with the Last Prisoner Project and donating, percent of product sales. Yeah. And so let's see. What else do I have to show you, Jimmy?
Tell me.
Ooh, s'mores. These are.
I had a s'more last night.
This is
but
actually a little preview.
It was not an infused s'more. Okay.
This is like a little chocolate cheesecake, s'mores cheesecake bite.
Never sweet enough for me. And child-proof containers. Again, use these responsibly. Start low and go slow.
So these are going to be our second brand that we're going to launch. So like sneak peek. They're going to also be in like really cool tins, but that brand's going to be called Double Baked. So like chocolate cheesecake, different flavors like blueberry cheesecake or peanut butter cheesecake. That's really cool.
Very important that these things end up in child-proof containers. And there's even some states, as you know, that are trying to ban the gummies, and yet Canada finally introduced gummies to the legal scene up there. And they are infusing their beverages with alcohol and cannabis.
That's interesting.
Correctly. Yeah. It is happening. At least that's what I'm hearing.
I
might be misinformed because sometimes I do get misinformed.
I prefer to keep them separate, but I think I would be open to trying something like that.
8 times the catalyst, according to our Dr. Jordan Tischler guy. 8 times. So if you go and you imbibe and then go imbibe and you mix, you're going to have an 8-time effect.
A greater effect. And so it's probably like maybe an unpredictable effect.
Oh, no. Definitely unpredictable. I just want to say. Yep, it definitely is. And then I've always found your body is going to ingest the edible differently than the
Right.
whether you get it through smoke or whatever
Different
it is.
bioavailability,
or
different
concentrate,
course.
or you vape it. Every little thing has a different effect. It is a medicine, people, that is used recreationally too. I mean, I think that I see it.
Check it out.
I can smell it from here.
Can you smell it from here?
Yes, I can.
It smells so good. This is
beautiful bud.
our Ice Cream Man strain. And
By the
what's
way,
cool?
the best names. I love the. I think I think one day I may not be in this earth, okay, but I'd love to see a young brand or a young OG, the young old guy brand, right? Even though OG is supposed to be old gangster, right?
Original,
original, whatever. At this point, if you were an original gangster, you were old.
Yeah, I guess.
So,
check this out.
And that's another gizmo. You are the
It is.
gadget woman.
Well, these ones are actually available at Northeast Alternative.
Of course they are.
But alternatives. But this is a cartridge that's our Ice Cream Man strain, but then extracted and blended into a cartridge.
Okay, let's educate people that don't understand that process. Can we talk about decarboxylation?
Decarboxylation? Yeah, it's
that too.
Education Wednesday.
It's Education Wednesday.
Yeah.
Go ahead. That'll be our last lesson.
Decarboxylation is when you have the acid forms of a cannabinoid, like THCA or CBDA. Those are like the raw forms, the acid forms. So if you have flower that's fresh or off the plant, dried, or whatever, most of the cannabinoids are going to be that form with THCA with the acid suffix. Decarboxylation is the process that removes that acid molecule, the A, so you end up with the activated form
of THC.
Yeah, and that's done through heat. So when you're smoking flower, you're doing it like in the moment as it's burning, right? That heat is being applied as you inhale. But with something like an edible, you have to do that decarboxylation in the process before you infuse it into the food, or it's not going to affect you the same way.
I'm going to do a show, an education show on edibles, and I'm going to ask
Get Jim Belushi in here.
I know, I love it. Well, you know what? We're in the queue, as they say, right? We're going to get an interview with Jim Belushi.
All right.
Because Jamie Pearson from Bang Corporation is friends with him. And if you saw in that clip that we showed, he was holding the Bang chocolates.
Oh, yeah.
And giving them a plug on that show. And that's why I threw in a little plug for the fact. And sure enough, after this live in studio Cannabis Chat show, you will see In the Weeds with Emma Chasen. We'll be talking more about education. You will also see the interview I did with Jamie Pearson. I also have an educator named Rob Mejia, who's a professor at Stockton University. That too will follow. And I think we threw in, the Vote Pro Pot guys at the end. The Vote Pro Podcast guys. And the first ever Weed Talk Live, which was presented as an In the Weeds special with Dr. Marion McNabb, Stephen Mandilli, Beth Dost, and Dr. Eric Ruby. And I'm pretty sure Kurt Dalton, and I think Kurt Dalton made his debut. He didn't know it, but he was auditioning for me on that show. And he did a great job. We said, you know what? Let's do the show, just the two of us, and bring it back. And that's how it all started. And Hilary, you were there at the last time we did a live thing, and here you're back. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back.
And by the way, she had the flu so bad when we last saw you.
Or COVID. It was like
COVID.
Clinically diagnosed, just not confirmed with a test.
Because she couldn't get a test. And sure enough, a week ago, you said you were sick again. You got a test, and you were negative.
Exactly.
We've come a long way in 6 months, is it? Six
About
months, March
6
to
months.
September.
Yeah, can you believe it?
Yes, I can. It feels like 10 years. Right? I mean, it has.
Yeah,
time
in some ways
flies
it
when you
has.
have fun. When you're not having fun and you're in quarantine, it slows down to a snail's crawl.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So anyway, Hilary, again, thank you so much for being our first in-studio guest.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Happy to come back anytime.
I want to thank Karen Solomon. I want to thank Sarah Galt, who does our social media. I want to thank Isabel in the other room, Isabel Turner in the other room. She'll never come on camera. Dan French, who doesn't want to come on camera, but I'm going to make him go on camera at some point. That's our group here at Pro Cannabis Media. So I thank you all for tuning in, checking us out. We'll be back Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then after that, we'll have the first run of some of our pre-produced programming. So for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, please remember it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching Cannabis Chat. We'll be back on Friday.
We are Pro Cannabis Media. We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Weeds with Jimmy Young. And today we have a very special guest. I guess you could almost say this is a coast-to-coast interview because I'm on the East Coast outside of Boston, Mass. And Emma Chasen, and by the way, I'm hoping that is how you pronounce your last name.
Yes, that's perfect.
Phew. Emma Chasen is out in Portland, Oregon on the left coast or the Pacific coast, if you will. So Emma, thank you so much for joining us today on In the Weeds. And I look forward to talking with you because you are all about online education about the cannabis sativa plant, correct?
Yes. Yes, I am. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Cool. Well, you actually did spend some time on the East Coast at Brown University, I believe in Providence, Rhode Island. Am I right?
You are right. And I am a born and raised New Yorker. So I was born and raised East Coast, but I did move out to Portland about 5 years ago.
Well, I certainly won't hold the fact that you're from New York because I'm from Boston, and you know that whole New York-Boston sports rivalry thing. But since the Boston teams have won so many championships in the 21st century, I don't even get into that anymore.
Oh, get out of here.
Tell me a little bit. First of all, your major at Brown actually had something to do with plants, correct?
Correct. Yes. So I was very fortunate to study undergrad at Brown, where there is no core curriculum. So really they empower students to design whatever coursework resonates with them. And I was able to create a specialized track within the biology department where I looked at specifically medicinal plant research, pre-medical sciences, as well as ethnobotany. So the way in which indigenous peoples have used medicinal plants throughout history.
Wow. And you practiced that line because that was a great elevator pitch about your education and how special that was for you. How in the world did you get interested in learning about plant medicine?
So I grew up in quite a loud and robust Italian family full of very loud Italian women that actually had roots in plant medicine. So we are from an island in Italy called Ischia, and my great-great-grandmother actually practiced a lot of the Italian folk tradition there, brought that over with her to New York City when she immigrated. And my family has kind of kept that tradition. And so growing up, we absolutely integrated different plant medicine as well as different spiritual modalities from that Italian folk tradition since I can remember. So it's always been a part of my life. And then coming into Brown, I took a freshman year seminar titled Botanical Roots of Modern Medicine. And that's when it kind of clicked for me that, oh, I could study this more formally and actually try to devise a career path from it.
And lo and behold, here we are in 2020, and cannabis has been legalized by 11 states and the Washington, D.C. area as well. I believe 33 states have medical programs, and it's now a political issue. I cannot believe I've lived to actually see this day where in my home state, my native state of Massachusetts, it's legal, it's here, and of course it's been deemed essential in so many other states during the COVID shutdown. So I pinch myself almost every day that I'm out here actually talking about cannabis and learning every day, because I really do believe there is so much to learn, and I am absolutely fascinated with the science behind the plant. The fact that they can actually dictate, or should I say, you guys, you botanists out there, can actually dictate the DNA of the plant and what kind of effect it's going to have. I just can't believe we've gotten to this point, and I actually think we're still just scratching the surface. Am I right?
Absolutely, would agree. I am so excited about cannabis because there is such huge potential for discovery. I often compare it to like the space age, you know, where this is our new frontier. It's a brand new industry. And as you said, we are just scratching the surface of what we understand about this plant. There is still so much more to know, specifically in the way that it interacts with our bodies. And that is full of excitement for me as a scientist.
And of course, every body has a different body, and everybody has an endocannabinoid system. Every mammal has an endocannabinoid system in it. And just understanding what that system does and how it impacts our pain receptors and just our whole behaviors is amazing unto itself. And every day it seems like they're discovering a new cannabinoid, another cannabidiol chemical. That's what they call the little chemicals, the CBDs and the CBNs, right? And the THC.
Yes, the cannabinoids. Yes.
The cannabinoids. And it seems like every day they're discovering new ones and finding out what that particular one does. But here's a question I always ask scientists, and I definitely consider you and respect you as a scientist. The role of the terpene in the cannabis plant. Can you define, in layman's terms, what terpenes do as they interact with the THC and the CBD and the CBN that's in the cannabis plant?
Yes. So terpenes are our aromatic compounds, and that means that they give plants their smell. They are found abundantly in most plants in nature, even some insects. However, they are highly concentrated in the cannabis plant. And from the plant's perspective, they're really, really good at fending off any kinds of pests, pathogens, or predators. So they have a lot of insecticidal properties, and they also have quite a pungent smell and taste. So for animals who would come and munch on the plant, they really deter those munchers from attacking the plant. So they help the plant's survival. However, when we as humans consume them, they also have therapeutic applications within our own body. And actually, they're able to work together synergistically, as we call it, with the cannabinoids to amplify the therapeutic potential of the experience. And they do this by interacting with many different receptor families and physiological factors and targets in our body. A really common one is the serotonin system, which most people know serotonin is kind of our happy molecule. It's our mood stabilizer, and there are a lot of terpenes that can actually influence this system to promote anxiety relief and mood elevation and euphoria.
You know, you mentioned the odor of the cannabis plant and the role that the terpene plays in it. As you probably know, there's a pungent odor to cannabis sativa. A lot of people either really like it or find it abhorrent. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Will it ever exist that we will have a odor-free cannabis sativa plant?
You absolutely can breed a plant to have zero terpenes. And so if you do that, then yes, the odor is actually really vegetal. It just smells kind of like a vegetable. And there are some varieties that definitely teeter towards that end of the spectrum. However, I would definitely encourage people, if they say that they hate the smell, maybe they just haven't smelled the right terpene yet. There are some really bright citrusy notes. There are some really sweet kind of lavender notes to it. There are some spicy notes. I truly believe that there might be a smell for everybody out there.
And everybody has a smell, so there you go. So one of them, I think, is it myrcene and limacine?
Myrcene and limonene, so close.
Yeah, right. That's I've always been close, but unfortunately only in horseshoes. Does that help me? So back to this combination the terpene interaction with the THC and the CBD. And, everybody knows CBD because of how that particular chemical, I believe, has been abused by the business community because, as you know, Mitch McConnell, who we really don't like in the cannabis space, let's just say, he did help pass the Farm Bill in December of 2018. And I always point the finger at him because he's anti-cannabis, but he doesn't realize that by passing the Farm Bill, he opened up the Pandora's box for CBD to be considered a legal substance. And now, of course, the DEA and the FDA are pointing fingers at each other and saying, no, it's your responsibility. No, it's your responsibility. Oh, well, it's only our responsibility if it's over 0.3% THC. And then it's your responsibility. And it makes my brain hurt just to sit here and try to understand all that. The CBD phenomenon, what's your feeling about that and your opinions about where you think we might end up going using CBD and having it more accepted, if you will, in our products, whether that's drinking or food products?
Sure. Yeah. I really think that CBD can be considered kind of a gateway, not only to cannabis, but also to plant medicine as a whole. So part of what I hope that the cannabis industry can really teach people is that there are a lot of varieties of plant medicine that we can use for preventative medicine in regards to just elevated health and wellness. And understandably so, there's a lot of trepidation around cannabis and THC in particular. The war on drugs did a number to people as far as their fear around cannabis. And what CBD is doing now, since it's nationally legal, it's allowing people to get a little bit more comfortable with plant medicine, with cannabis. I think that it is incredibly important that the CBD industry especially moves forward with some really smart regulations so that we can make sure that consumers are receiving transparency as far as what's going into these products, how they're being tested, how the plant material is being grown, so that when people do choose to kind of take that leap and purchase that CBD oil, they can be assured that there is an accurate concentration of CBD, that there is no pesticides in that formula, and that it has been formulated and extracted for maximum therapeutic potential, for the experience that the consumer is looking for. So I hope that from a regulatory perspective, that's the path that we go down. Otherwise, currently what's happening is that there is a lot of snake oil on the market. And so people who are interested in CBD, they're really excited about it. They go and purchase some CBD oil, but maybe it's not manufactured ethically, or it's not tested properly, or it's just hemp seed oil that doesn't even have any CBD in there. And then what you get is a really frustrated consumer base who kind of loses any hope in plant medicine, right? So I think that there is the definitely optimistic option that this national CBD industry could, if regulated properly, really help people feel more comfortable with plant medicine, specifically cannabis.
Yeah. How confident are you that our regulatory agencies will be doing that?
We'll see what happens in November with the change around.
I'll tell you what, there's going to be a lot of people heading north of the border if a certain thing doesn't happen, let's just say. I try to avoid politics, but it's amazing that the cannabis word is part of the divide between Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. I mean, I smile because I'm so frustrated by the whole political system right now. But that's, again, a story for another day. Do you find, is the CBD industry, at least the cannabis industry has the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. It has lobbyists in Washington looking out for the cannabis industry. But CBD is just an offshoot of that. Do you find that the CBD world is being properly represented as far as lobbyists go? Or is it, again, just kind of a, let's throw it up against the wall and see what sticks?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's closer to the latter. I mean, there are definitely hemp associations, especially hemp grower associations, that are advocating for better regulation and legislation around the agricultural perspective, especially as we move into more industrial hemp. However, from the CBD health and wellness standpoint, I mean, currently the FDA doesn't allow CBD to be formulated into any dietary supplement or edible product. And I mean, for any of us who have even a little bit of an understanding of the CBD industry, that's laughable because most of the products on the market are dietary supplements or in edible form. And so it's kind of the wild, wild west out here where people are interpreting the rules as they do and kind of just like you said, throwing it up on the wall, seeing what sticks, and kind of just crossing their fingers that that the FDA doesn't take notice of them.
Now, Oregon, one of the early adapters, if you will, maybe not the earliest, but I believe they followed Washington State, since California and Washington State had both, I think, were a little bit further advanced than Oregon. But now Oregon had a glut of supply, and I believe they weren't able to do much with it. What's your current review and kind of opinion about the cannabis businesses in Oregon?
So the market has definitely stabilized since that 2017 crash, where we just had huge supply and very little demand. And I think that this can kind of launch into a conversation around the lack of consumer adoption and education. So Oregon is a state of around 4 million people. Only 14% of the market at the beginning of legalization were consuming cannabis, and that number stayed pretty steady. So there was no like large rate of consumer adoption, whereas on the other side, the industry side, there was quite huge growth in the amount of companies that were coming onto the scene with this kind of false mindset, unfortunately, that it was the green rush. They were going to make a ton of money and just kill it because it's legal weed. Who doesn't love legal weed? Everybody's going to want to come by. And that's just not what happened. And even more sadly in Oregon, because we have such a black market legacy, there were a lot of outdoor family farms in Southern Oregon that joined the legal market, again, with the hope of going legal, making more money, and they just unfortunately did not have that experience. I mean, a lot of businesses shut down, and there was a lot of consolidation of the market. Canadian companies came in, other companies from California came in and kind of bought up a lot of the landscape. I will say that craft still prevails in Oregon. Portland prides itself on craft beer, craft wine, craft food, and craft cannabis. And so there are a few mom and pop kind of craft boutique strongholds left. However, because of that glut, we saw a huge percentage of consolidation.
Gotcha. And I don't know, did you get to see that Discovery Channel show that starred Jim Belushi this past week, Growing Belushi? Because it's about an Oregon farm. That's where he has his farm.
Yes, you know, I haven't seen the first episode, but I actually was lucky enough to interview Jim Belushi for a radio show that I was on, and he has a really cool operation going down in Southern Oregon.
Yes, he does. And I recommend the show because now I've watched it twice, obviously for educational purposes and entertainment purposes as well. I've always been a big fan of his, and of course, you know, idolized his late brother. And it was on this past show where Jim said basically that, look, if medical marijuana had been around during the time of the early days, the pioneering days of Saturday Night Live in the 70s, he believes his brother would still be alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is kind of sad, but that is how he feels. And of course, now he has embraced the industry. And I did really enjoy the program on many different fronts. And the character development is going to be fascinating. I believe it is Captain Jack is the herb that he was so excited about being able to grow. And the character of the grower. Now, I'm going out on a limb thinking, you at one point, I believe I looked at your bio, you were a bud tender of the year at some point out in Oregon, yes?
Yes, that is correct.
How honored were you to be known as the bud tender of the year?
I was quite honored to be Portland's Best Bud Tender of 2016. It was just when I started my career in cannabis was 2015. So it was nice to be recognized by the people in that sense.
So speaking of people, the character of the grower, how many interesting characters have you met who are just growers?
Oh, I mean, so many. That's a great thing about being a bud tender is that you get to really see all sides of the industry. You get to meet people from all walks of life who are participating. And I would say that the role of the grower, they definitely have the craziest stories. I mean, a lot of them had grown through prohibition. And so kind of the novel approaches that they took to just survive during that time, and also the deep love and reverence of the cannabis plant was something that was always so stunning to me.
Oh, and for many people who have enjoyed it, perhaps even as long as I've enjoyed it, there's always something new to learn, which kind of leads me into the next wave of questions about your online educational offerings. I've always said that you get to a point sometime in your age where you really do believe you have something to teach everyone. And it comes from experience, life experience, whether you have book knowledge about a specific subject or not. But I really do believe that everybody has something to teach everybody else. And in the cannabis universe, it's huge, and it's always growing. So how do you, as an educator, kind of narrow down to the basics of Cannabis 101?
So I really pull on my academic experience as well as my experience working in oncology research to be able to digest down this kind of white paper information. So this scientific evidence, which is often laden with scientific jargon, and it's very hard to understand for somebody who does not have that kind of academic experience or training. When I started as a bud tender, I just noticed a huge vacuum of accessible education where kind of we had the extremes of these scientific research papers that have been published. THC is highly researched, so the information is there, but it's really hard to understand for the lay individual. Whereas on the other side, we had a lot of blogs and kind of media websites that would publish content, but it was really hard to verify the scientific legitimacy of that information. And then you have the industry professionals who really have no kind of standardized education or training in the workplace, especially this was over 5 years ago. And it was kind of like, oh, you love to smoke weed? Great. You're behind the counter. Get ready to sell. And to me, that was just such a disservice to the patient community who was asking questions that their doctors couldn't even answer. And it was also a liability on the side of the business. And so I set about to create this curriculum that really nailed down the fundamentals of cannabis science so that bud tenders, as well as other industry professionals, could best predict experience for patients and consumers alike. And because I did work in the role of bud tender, and I also was a general manager of the shop, and then I eventually carved out a role as director of education for myself, I was really able to do the market research to take this curriculum through many iterations to kind of piece it down until I found the exact kind of recipe for what I believe that any bud tender should know before they go out there and they make their first sale.
And of course, I had a bad experience with the first time I dealt with a bud tender with my medical card in 2013. I was trying to, I think the first words I said to him, I said, look, I don't want to smoke it anymore. There's got to be a million different ways to ingest it and get the same kind of buzz, if you will. And I was told to try an edible product and was given bad advice about the amount of that edible product. And like so many others out there who have tried edible for the first time, perhaps too much that first. You can certainly bite off more than you should be chewing. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the old, you start low and you go slow, like 2.5 milligrams as an entry level dose. And I believe my first dose was 33 milligrams.
Ooh.
But I woke up at 4 a.m. The room was spinning. I lived to tell the story. It's kind of my philosophy of life anyway. I don't ever want to have 33 milligrams of an edible again, nor have I. But you hear some of these stories a lot from people, and I'm going out on a limb thinking you too have had a few.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've experienced that myself. I also had a friend who went into a dispensary here in Oregon, and this was just a year ago. So at this point, I mean, comparatively, we're a relatively mature market. And he was actually looking for something for his dad, who doesn't consume a lot of cannabis, but was in a lot of pain, just looking for some pain relief, again, in an edible form. And the bud tender was like, oh, here, take this chocolate bar, have him eat the whole chocolate bar, which is 50 milligrams of THC. He'll be so high, he won't even feel anymore. And luckily, I mean, my friend knows me, knows what I do, hears me talk about this all the time, and was like, actually I had to school the bud tender and be like, no, give me something with a little bit of CBD in there. We're talking about a starting dose of 5 milligrams of THC, like really take the bud tender through that educational experience. But to me, what's scary is that for people who don't know what they're doing, they're putting their full trust into this person. And while cannabis does not yet have a defined lethal dose, so it can't kill you, it still is a highly uncomfortable experience. And as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I mean, in order to increase the rate at which the consumer market is adopting cannabis, we need to make sure that people who are interested are having at least not a bad experience right off the bat.
Right.
Because people who do have that scary experience, often what happens is they say, oh, no, not for me, not for me.
I don't want to go through that again. That's for sure.
Exactly. Whereas like really it could have been for you if you were given proper guidance and instruction on how to microdose and safely and effectively experiment with this plant until you find out what works for you.
Right. And that is so important. You know, one of the things that is lost in the translation throughout this whole thing is it's truly plant medicine. You know, sure, there's some fun to it. There's definitely adult use recreation that gets involved with this. Okay. Everything in small doses is important. We preach responsible use of cannabis and to educate yourself about this medicine, because we are all our own doctors and we're self-medicating with this plant. And you know, what works for me may not work for you, and especially in the doses that I might take versus you. And that could have a lot to do with your experience with the plant. It could also have a lot to do with metabolism. And also, are you awakening your endocannabinoid system for the very first time? And therein lies another challenge to people, because they'll try it, nothing happened, I don't get it. So an hour later, 2 hours later, I'm going to take it again. Next thing I know, the room's spinning again. So how obviously education to me drives the bus here. All of us who are in this industry have an obligation to the public to educate the public. You agree?
I could not agree more. And I think that it really has to start with this shift from the allopathic model, meaning the Western medicine approach of you take a pill, you take a standardized dose of that pill, you will get a subset of effects, whether they be positive or negative, but they're predictable. And we need to move it into a more nutraceutical approach where botanical medicine lives, where there is no standardized dose for people, where 4 milligrams of THC could give me the same effect that 40 milligrams of THC could give somebody else. And so it's important, again, to really ground in the reality of it's going to take a little bit of experimentation to find what works for you. But our job as industry professionals and guides is to make sure that we are mitigating any of the uncomfortable side effects by adopting and encouraging strategies such as microdosing, keeping a consumption journal, making sure that people feel really safe and empowered to experiment with themselves in a way that's not going to hurt them.
A consumption journal, that's a great term. I'm going to remember that. In fact, I actually think I read something recently that there's either an app in development or it already exists that you can download for free and keep track of your intake and what was in it as far as the combinations. Have you heard of anything like that?
Yes, I know of a couple apps on the market. One of them that comes to mind immediately is Relief. And of course, the leaf is spelled like leaf on a plant, where you are able to track the time of day, the way that you're consuming, what compounds are in that product, how much you consumed. And for me, it's also really important to take note of kind of set and setting. So how much water did you drink? Did you get in a fight with your partner? Are you really stressed out? I mean, what's going on with you apart from what you're consuming, as that will have influence on the experience.
And how much alcohol do you have in your system when you partake?
Oh yeah, another big one that will definitely influence the experience.
One of the doctors I interviewed 8 times the magnification is pretty much what this doctor of cannabis, Jordan Tischler, he's they call him, what do they call him? He's Harvard educated, undergrad in Harvard Medical, Preparation H, that's what they call themselves. And he is the one who came out with the 8 times of a catalyst. And I'll be perfectly honest, again, if you are taking an edible and then you go out and drink on top of that, you are playing with your brain in many ways, right?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely do not encourage the combining of the substances. I mean, being crossfaded, as we call it, is an intense experience that often ends in a spinning head and you in front of a toilet bowl.
That's right. And Lord knows, I'm human. I'll admit, it's not something I ever want to do again. I'll be honest. I try to avoid that. And let's talk about that experience just for a second, because I love getting advice from people, educated people like yourself, scientists, educators. Okay, you know you've had too much. There's all sorts of what they call, different anecdotes, different ways to control that. What do you recommend? And please tell me it's not chomping down on black peppercorns.
No, it is not. Though I do understand where that kind of urban legend came in to play. And I do think it's fun, but not my go-to, I'll have to say. I think that, first and foremost, water. Drink as much water as you can and make sure that you are in a place where you feel safe and you're with people that you trust. I think that, again, the set and setting aspect is really important. Then to kind of bring you down, there are products on the market right now specifically designed for this. Undo is an example of a capsule that you can take and it undoes your high. There is also CBD, which is available, and that will help to really bring down the intoxicating effects of THC. Now, I will say that it is important to note that CBD is most effective in doing that when you have consumed THC in a relatively low dose. So if you took, 200 milligrams of THC, then it may not help at that point, But if you consumed maybe 10 milligrams of THC and had some alcohol on top of that and are just feeling really kind of out of your mind, then consuming some CBD may help to bring you back down a little bit, help to mitigate the more uncomfortable side effects like anxiety, paranoia, elevated heart rate, etc.
So if you have a bottle in the cupboard that has 270 milligrams of CBD, straight CBD in an oil dropper, like I have, do you take the whole dropper? Do you chug the whole bottle? How do you know how much CBD to counter the high you've gotten from your THC?
It's hard. It's not an exact science. And like we've been saying, every body has a different body, right? Everybody's unique. And so everybody will respond differently. And it will also depend on how much THC you've taken initially. I'll say that the most important thing, if you have CBD oil, is to make sure that you keep it under your tongue for as long as possible. So that will allow it to go directly into the bloodstream and it'll activate a lot quicker rather than having to go through your digestive system and through your liver. That'll just take a little bit longer. And by the time it reaches your system, you may have already kind of calmed down. So I'd start with, 10 to 15 milligrams of CBD under the tongue for as long as possible and see how that makes you feel.
There you go. And I think that's actually great advice. And I just wonder, any of our first responders out there, because Lord knows this happens. I remember reading in Colorado when they first opened up their market to adult use, and they talked about the emergency room visits are up because of people's, inexperience, and they're taking too much and all this neat stuff. And I wonder, are they using straight CBD in ambulances, in first responders, in emergency rooms? Have you heard of that use? Is there any kind of a practicum out there?
I haven't heard of that use. And in fact, I really don't know if it's happening. If it is, I'll be surprised. The only place that I know of that they at least allow, or they are amenable to the use of CBD oil, is in hospice care. So end of life, palliative care. That seems to be the kind of section of more Western medical approach that will allow that kind of CBD oil. Even in some places will allow THC cannabis, just to help increase the quality of life for that end of life experience.
There you go. It probably beats morphine, I'm just saying. Although
exactly.
I'll never forget when I had my emergency back surgery, having that morphine drip in that little plunger thing, that little button. That was pretty cool. Of course, they limit the amount you can touch that button, let's just say, but that was another story for another day. I want to ask you about plant-based diets. How familiar are you with them? Do you see the superiority of them? A lot of people are moving towards that. And with the plant-based diet comes this plant along, for fun or medicine. What's your feeling about a plant-based diet? Is it superior to the meat and potatoes that a lot of us live off?
So I am familiar with the plant-based diet. I don't practice it myself, but I do believe that food is medicine. And I also believe that medicinal plants do hold a lot of value in our medicine cabinet as preventatives. I will say that, again, coming back to this idea that every single body is unique, right? Mm-hmm. So I can't really tell you what's going to be best for your body. And I think that we also need to open up the conversation to really look at the societal implications, such as food deserts and the communities that maybe don't have access to fresh produce, and what that looks like for people. I think that it can do more harm than good for people's mental and emotional health to say, hey, you should be on a plant-based diet for your physical health. And if you're not, that's actually really bad for you, and it's really bad for the planet. Well, if somebody lives in a rural community where they don't have access to fresh produce, maybe their closest grocery store is a gas station that's 30 miles down the road, it would be a significant financial and mental and emotional impact for them to have to travel to try to find that produce. It just may not be feasible for them, right? So I think that anytime we talk about diet, anytime we talk about what people put in their body, we always need to examine where they're at in life and what's feasible for them. I have seen the research and the scientific evidence around moving towards a more plant-based diet. So still consuming maybe some dairy, some meat, some fish, and seeing how that has long-term positive effects on health. However, I just don't think that we can tell people what to do in that regard without really addressing the more community based initiatives that would need to occur for that to happen.
Hey, one last question before I let you give a little plug for your course and how people can find you. In Oregon, it's a mature market. It's been around for a few years. Are you finding that your politicians and your representatives are more well-versed now on cannabis? And have you ever been asked by a legislative body to come in and perhaps educate them on it?
So I wouldn't say that they're more well-versed in cannabis science per se, but they do love the program. I mean, it's making the state a lot of money, and with politicians, I mean, no matter what side of the aisle, money talks, right? And so in May alone, I believe that Oregon made over $100 million in just 1 month from just cannabis. And so that is huge. So we've seen a lot of support for the cannabis program from our politicians because of that economic advantage. I'd still say that most legislators are grossly undereducated around cannabis. And my goal in what I do is to push at least enough consumer education and industry education so that we can lobby for better regulation and legislation from the top down in regards to requiring training and education for our industry to be able to allow it to just ethically evolve.
That's it. And how do people find you?
So please find me at my website. My company is Eminent Consulting. The website is eminentconsultingfirm.com. And from there, you can read more about me, our services, as well as see a big, nice button to our online courses.
There you go. All right, Emma Chasen from Portland, Oregon. Again, thank you so much for chit-chatting with me. It's been a pleasure to talk more about this with you. I love talking education with anyone. And you obviously have your hands pretty well set on what you like to teach, how you teach, and backing it up with science. And that's terrific. I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Well, thanks so much, Jimmy. It was amazing to be on here and chat with you. The pleasure was all mine.
All right. So for Emma Chasen, I'm Jimmy Young from In the Weeds. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk Now, Weed Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.